Hello, and welcome to the Not-A-Cast podcast, the one true chapter-by-chapter podcast going through A Song of Ice and Fire one chapter a week. I'm one of your hosts, Jeff, better known as Brenda B. Fish.
And I'm your other host, Emmett, better known as Poor Quentin.
And welcome to the 86th episode of the Not-A-Cast, titled Lake of Fire, an analysis of A Clash of Kings Arya 4, in which the pig-faced shit knight Amory Lorch wipes out Yoren of the Night's Watch and most of his charges. It's not all bad news, though. At least Arya saves Rorge and Biter. Is that good news, Emmett?
There's always a little silver lining to these clouds in A Song of Ice and Fire, isn't there?
You are absolutely right. It's a nice little silver lining we have there in the form of Rorge and Biter. But at least Jacket survives, so that's a good thing. This episode, as always, is brought to you by our small council, our Hand of the King Wolfman Zach, Grand Maester Tim Bob, Lord Commander of the King's Guard Mark N, Lord Travis, Master of Ships and Word of the Waves, Sir Keith J, Master of Whisperers, Lord Philip the Merciful, Master of Laws, Jancy O, Lady Commander of the Night's Watch, Lord Jean, Master of Coin, Archmaester June, Healer of the Lesser Poxes, Ragged Michael, Warden of the North, Nelson the Hammer, Prince of Dragonscone, Scarlet the Other Red Woman and Mistress of Whispers, Lord Micah, Warden of the West of the Kraken's Bane, Lord James, the Gym that was promised, the High-Bearded Priest, the Blue-Ringed Octoling, Lord Jake, Assistant to the Hand of the King, Lady Zeta Valerian, Hedrical, Captain of the Airship Arrogance, His Grace's High Inquisitor, Sir Frank B., Lord James Stormboard, Warden of the Worldwide Werewood, Sir Jasper the Cruel, the King's Justice, Lawrence, Prince of Dorne, Richard, Sea Lord of Bravos, Kelly, Ward of the Beast and Mistress of Bay of Crabs, Stephen the Steadfast, Master of Hounds, the Blue Winter Rose, Knight of Highgarden, Lady Stephanie, Lord Ryan, Lord Anonymous, Lord Carlos, Lord Andrew the Restless, a Priest of the Drowned God, and finally the King's Cook, Nali Ali Master. I fucked it up one more time. He actually messaged me to give me the correct pronunciation. The King's Cook, Nali Ali Master of Cannoli. Whatever. I fucking give up, man.
Close enough, sir. We'll take it as a victory. And thank you to all our counselors, as always.
Yes, thank you guys very much indeed. Our spoiler week, as we say in all episodes, will potentially be talking about all published books. That is the 5 novels, 3 Duncan Egg novellas, histories, interviews, the Wins Winners sample chapters, as well as Game of Thrones, the TV show. Anything and everything. And for those of you who are listening, the History of Westeros podcast live stream is kicking off around 11:30 Freedom Standard Time, which is EST. So as soon as you're done here, head on over there, and the link will be in the comments, as Emmett is typing out right at this very moment.
Absolutely. You can follow the link there. That's going to be real exciting. Always love it when History of Westeros does a live stream.
Absolutely indeed.
So normally here we would read a question and respond to it, and we do have an excellent question for this week, but we're going to save it for our final discussion for this episode. A few weeks ago, Jeff promised that we'd be reading some of our reviews on Apple Podcasts, and we don't want to make a liar out of Jeff. So let's do that now. A comment we got from Mike and Ike, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, because all the other Mike and Ikes were taken. Life-changing. Jeff and Ernie have become the mid-40s lesbian moms I never had. So true. So poetic. So pure. What do you think, Jeff?
I love it. I love being a mid-40s lesbian mom. I mean, you know, I'm not a lesbian in my mid-40s or a woman, but I mean, I love it. I love the idea of it.
Spiritually, though, in terms of what's inside, Jeff, I think this is accurate.
This is actually very, very accurate. So thank you, Mike and Ike, for the fantastic iTunes review. Really appreciate it. Next one comes from Silverwing Flyer, who says 1 + 2 = less than 2. And then he goes on. Not-A-Cast offers great content and insights into every aspect of A Song of Ice and Fire. The plot, the characters, the overarching themes, and writing techniques. Jeff's quote-unquote readings, e.g. Catelyn's Moonlight Sonata from Game of Thrones, often highlight specific aspects of writing that take my breath away. Oh, sorry. Emmett provides articulate... God, I wasn't even given clearance for that one this time. I just snuck that one in there.
Sure, you gotta get a permit next time.
Emmett provides articulate and wonderful, profound, big picture insights on characters and themes. Emmett and Jeff balance each other's pacing and perspective to make for a content-rich podcast that holds my attention. 5, and he then puts it in numbers. 5 with an exclamation point, stars, guys. Well, thank you very much, Silverwing. That's an excellent review. It makes me feel warm inside.
Thank you so much, Silverwing, but try not to confuse Jeff with math next time. I know you were trying to get him to say 1 + 1 = greater than 2, but that's just beyond the poor illiterate boys. So come on, know your audience next time.
True that.
Our next review comes from Joe. Repetitive whining. If you want to listen to a couple of guys whine about feudalism and overread the text, then this is the show for you. Well, thank you, Joe, for perfectly articulating what our target audience is. It's always useful to have free marketing done for us in that regard.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Like every
Mhm.
review is a review. It just brings us more and more fame or notoriety. In this case, notorieties. And we are going to continue to whine about feudalism because it sucks and it's the worst possible system for these people, and it ends up oppressing millions of people on Westeros. And if you don't, and you think it's cool, I think you should probably get a better soul, maybe,
It
possibly.
doesn't mean we've figured out how power works. Let's be very clear. It's not like, and that's why Emmett and Jeff should be in charge and make all the decisions. No, that's just as bad an idea. But it's hard to read these books and embrace the power structure that's under the microscope. But to each their own. You're entitled to your incorrect opinion.
You are absolutely entitled to every incorrect opinion possible. So thank you, Joe. Thank you in quotation marks, Joe. Our next review comes from Sergeant Kevlar, whose title is Running with Wolves. And he says, the only opportunity I have to listen to podcasts is during my daily runs. Ever since I've found this podcast, I've been running farther and farther every day so I can listen a little longer. These guys are forcing me into fitness. I love this podcast. Well, I want to congratulate you for doing much more running. That's really good. Exercise is an excellent use of your time. It
I
prolongs
guess.
life. It's good. I promise you, Emmett, it's good. Try it sometime. Try it.
I've been told this many times, never believably. But you know what? If you win the Olympic medal out of this, we would be happy to take credit.
We will happily take credit for that. In fact, just play it over the broadcast and over the speakers at the Olympic Games. Are they going to be in Tokyo next time? I don't know. I don't pay attention to the Olympics. But yeah, we'll broadcast the Nightcast podcast over the speakers at the Olympics when you're winning the race. That would be great. That could be your entry music in our little welcome to the Nightcast.
There's a breathtaking image for the ages, Jeff. I love your ambitions.
I gotta have some sort of ambition, right?
Well put. So our final comment we're going to read for this episode comes from 00Goose00. If you love A Song of Ice and Fire, you will love this podcast. A Song of Ice and Fire holds a special place in my heart. Reading these books has got me through some difficult times in my life. Recently, I was diagnosed with a semi-rare condition that renders my left leg paralyzed. I have been depressed for months. When I discovered this podcast, it gave me the same joy and spark that reading the A Song of Ice and Fire novels gave me years ago. Emmett and Jeff were quite literally my lifesavers. After listening to this podcast, my health has even gotten better, doctors crediting my mental state for improvements. Today, I am proud to say that my leg has regained 100% full use thanks to this podcast. JK, still paralyzed. But now I have hours of killer chapter-by-chapter content from two of the greatest minds in the Song of Ice and Fire fandom. Amen, brothers. Well, thank you so much for that comment. It does our hearts so good. Our heart, we have one heart, I guess I've decided. Does both. Yes. It does both of our hearts so good to hear about our podcast contributing to anyone's life in a difficult time. That's really the best you can possibly hope for, but also to give them that same joy and spark, as they say, that reading the Song of Ice and Fire novels gave them. That's I think, a goal we've always had from the start, is to try to capture the joy we feel reading these novels and pass it on. So glad to hear it.
Yeah, so it's really amazing, and this review was left back in 2018, but I just thought it's still my favorite review. I'm sorry I have to have favorites because I'm an American, and I know we actually do things. We have favorites in this country. Yes, this is my all-time
European
favorite.
countries are never known for having favorites.
No,
that's an American invention. Only the Wild West came up with liking a thing more than another thing. American exceptionalism. Carry on.
Man. Yes, it's great. So thank you, Goose, so much for the review. We really appreciate it. Hope that your health has continued to improve and that you'll hopefully gain full health and restoration of the use of your left leg. So appreciate it. Thank you for the review. It means a lot.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for the reviews, everyone. We read all of them and keep them coming. It helps people find the podcast and helps our little community grow.
Absolutely. Amen, brother. Thanks you for the great reviews. And for those of you who are tuning in live now, our next Patreon-only episode titled Watchmen, our analysis of the 2009 Zack Snyder film Watchmen with some analysis of the first episode of HBO's Watchmen, is out for all of our small council patrons and will be coming out throughout the week for our High Lords and Ladies, Kingsguard, Sworn Swords, and poor fellow patrons. And if you are listening on the release date, it's already out now for all $5 and above patrons. So if you guys are listening on Monday, someday in November that I can't remember off the top of my head, it is out now for you guys. So check out that episode and our 20, yes, you heard that right, 20 other bonus episodes at patreon.com/Nauticast ASOIAF. But enough about Patreon, enough about reviews. Really appreciate all the patrons that we have and all the reviews that we're getting. We really appreciate it. Let's turn our attention to Arya's fourth clash chapter. When we last left Arya, Yoren's party of Night's Watch recruits had made their way north from King's Landing and had arrived in the Riverlands to wolves howling and distant screams carried on the wind. Holy shit, yikes. Let's see how things pan out in this edition of Arya Stark Sees the War Crimes in this synopsis of Clash of Kings, Arya 4. From a march through hell last week to a march into hell this week, Arya and her friends reach a blue-green ribbon of a river. Wait 1 second. There we go. Made the text a little bit bigger so I can see it. That's nice. Arya and her friends reach a blue-green ribbon of river, witnessing the vegetation and a water snake moving across the water. It's nice, beautiful, peaceful. No, wait. This is a George R. R. Martin. It seemed a peaceful place until Koss spotted the dead man. There, in the reeds. He pointed, and Arya saw it. The body of a soldier, shapeless and swollen. His sodden green cloak had hung up on a rotted log, and a school of tiny silver fishes were nibbling at his face. I told you there was bodies, Lami announced. I could taste them in the water. Yum. Yoren orders the body searched to see if there's any valuables, and then he rides out to the river to see whether it can be forded. Tragically, as we'll see by the end of this chapter, it cannot be forded here. But maybe there's a better place to ford elsewhere, ? So Yoren orders some of his boys to scout upriver and downstream to see if there's any place to cross. Everyone needs to hold up and wait here in this very, very safe place while the boys go out and scout. Searching the dead man nets a few copper coins and a lock of blonde hair tied in a red ribbon. Hot Pie and Lami then proceed to have a mud fight in the river, and Rorge screams at everyone to unchain him. Arya, meanwhile, observes a man named Kurz as he catches fish with his bare hands. It's just your normal Yoren is marching into goddamn hell type of day. And listen up, boys, savor this moment, because this is going to be the final happy moment for most of your very short lives. The men Yoren sent out return around noon and tell Yoren that there's a burned out bridge to the south. Yoren decides that they could probably ford the river with the horses, but the wagons would never make it. So he draws a map of the ground saying that they're south of the God's Eye. They can't go north and west due to all the smoke and fires that way. They can't go west as they can't cross the river with their wagons, and they can't go east back to the King's Road. So where are they going to go? Yoren moved the stick up where the line and circle met. Near as I recall, there's a town here. The Holdfast Stone, and there's a lordling's got a seat there too. Just a tower house, but he'll have a guard and might be a night or two. We'll follow the river north. Should be there before dark. They'll have boats, so I mean to sell all we got and hire us one. Ultimately, this plan relies on a couple of, shall we say, interesting assumptions. That they can find boats on the God's Eye, that they can buy boats if they can't find them, that they can get new mounts on the other side of the God's Eye. Oh, and also that they can take shelter at Harrenhal, where Lady Wen is at? Yeah, Yoren has been watching evening news of late. Hot Pie is the first to sound the alarm. Aren't there ghosts up in Harrenhal? Maybe we don't go there, but Yoren spits saying, that's for your ghosts. And then they mount off and gallop gallantly in the direction of shitty, shitty destiny. As they mount, though, Arya, continuing the trend of previous point of view characters, thinks about the history of Harrenhal, adding in the wrinkle that old Nan used to tell stories about how people who go to sleep at Harrenhal sometimes wake up all dead and burned, just like Harren the Black. But she, like Danny from last week, ain't afraid of no ghosts. Besides, there would only be nights at Harrenhal, and they would take her home and keep her safe. Yeah, it's not just Sansa who has a view of nights that needs to be dispelled, people. The party moves along the river trail. The party moves north along the river trail and sees abandoned houses and ripening fields of vegetables unattended by any farmers. They gather what food they can and keep moving. Finally, they come up on the town that Yoren was talking about, and it too is deserted. Yoren sat on his horse, frowning through his tangle of beard. Don't like it, he said, but there it is. We'll go have us a look, a careful look. See, maybe there's some folk hiding. Maybe they left a boat behind or some weapons we can use. Yoren orders everyone to go searching through the haunted house town in 4 groups of 5 apiece. Arya goes with Wath, Gendry, Hot Pie, and Lami. They move through deserted streets that freak the fuck out of Arya, and me too, for that matter. She wonders why everyone just up and ran. When a jump scare in the form of a shutter bangs open, Arya reaches for Needle, but there's no one there. It's just the wind. Just the wind. When they see the lake, they gallop forward, hoping to find boats or something or someone. Instead, they only find one overturned rowboat in the lake. Lami says they should check out the inn, but no, they're here to find boats. Sadly, the aforementioned overturned rowboat is the only boat in town. Arya takes the opportunity to wash off all the dirt in the warm green water, and hey, the water doesn't taste like dead people. Major, major plus. Arya wishes she could swim all the way back to Winterfell, but Wath yells at her to get out of the lake. They need to get back to Yoren to assist with the search. When they meet up with Yoren, it's mostly bad news everywhere. The town was as dark as any forest when Yoren and the others reappeared. Tower's empty, he said. Lord's gone off to fight maybe, or to get a small folk to safety. No telling. Not a horse or pig left in town, but we'll eat. Saw a goose running loose and some chickens, and there's some good fish in the God's Eye. And then everyone gets to argue about what to do now. Should they patch the rowboat? Build new boats? Well, as to the first question, the rowboat would only take 4 people across. And to the second, no one knows shit about building boats, so that's a no-go. Still, maybe they build a raft. Yoren decides very, very consequentially to sleep on that idea. In the meantime, they're going to hide out in the holdfast to Arya's horror. Arya cannot keep quiet. We shouldn't stay here, she blurted. The people didn't. They all ran off, even their lord. Arya's scared, Lami announced, braying laughter. I'm not, she snapped back. But they were. Smart boy, said Yoren. Thing is, the folks who lived here are at war, like it or no. We're not. Night's Watch takes no part, so no man's our enemy. And no man's our friend, Arya thinks. I mean, yeah, this is the part where you expect to be like, well, Yoren, way to be a fucking dumbass idiot. But, Yoren kind of has a point. The Night's Watch is ostensibly neutral in this conflict, any conflict. And okay, I'll wait to defend my boy Yoren in the depth section. Yoren and the poison Arya move into the holdfast, placing the iron bars down through the entrance. Arya observes that the walls were 10 feet of unbordered stone. They find a plot device in the form of a trapdoor inside with a tunnel that leads out to the lake. Interesting detail. Keep it in mind for the end of this chapter. They eat a chicken and some onions inside the holdfast, but no one's really much for talking while they eat. After dinner, Yoren divides up when everyone will be on watch, and Arya catches the second one. Sleep proves fleeting for Arya, so she decides to do some sword honing. No, not that kind of sword honing. Get your minds out of the gutter. Hot Pie sits next to her and asks where she got the sword from. My brother gave it to me, she muttered. I never knew you had a brother. Arya paused, scratching her shirt. There were fleas in the straw, though she couldn't see why a few more would bother her. I have lots of brothers. You do? Are they bigger than you or littler? I shouldn't be talking like this. Yoren said I should keep my mouth shut. Bigger, she lied. They have swords too, big long swords, and they showed me how to kill people who bother me. Hot Pie beats her tree at that, and Arya falls asleep, dreaming of a wolf howling. She wakes up with her heart thumping in her chest, knowing that something is wrong. She starts shouting for everyone to wake up. Everyone disbelieves that anything is amiss, claiming that Arya had a bad dream, but Arya shouts that it was a wolf that she heard. Someone is coming. Before they could hoot her down again, the sound came shuddering through the night only. It was no wolf this time. It was Kurz blowing his hunting horn, sounding danger. At that, everyone starts frantically donning clothes. Arya runs for the gate and passes by Jaqen H'ghar and Biter. Jaqen yells at Arya to free him as he knows how to fight, but she ignores them, climbing up onto the catwalk. She reaches the wall, climbs partway up the wall, and sees what appears to be a sea of lantern bugs in the town. But it ain't lantern bugs. Then she realized that they were men with torches, galloping between the houses. She saw a roof go up, flames licking in the belly of the night with hot orange tongues as the thatch caught. Another followed, and then another. And soon there were fires blazing everywhere. Arya thinks it's about 200 riders, but she doesn't know for certain given how the fire and smoke is distorting her view. Fact check, Tywin dispatches Amory with 300 riders at the end of a Game of Thrones, but I certainly hope that the Brotherhood Without Banners has drubbed the bejesus out of Amory's party and that they're down to 200. All the same, they'll be coming for them soon. Then Gendry points out that a column of riders are approaching the holdfast. They come up at the holdfast, demanding that the holdfast be opened in the name of the king. One of the recruits yells back, wondering which king they're talking about before being cuffed for his troubles. Yoren climbs to the top of the gate and yells that the townsfolk are all gone, and that he's merely a recruiter for the Night's Watch, with recruits for the watch heading north. But the men below think Yoren and company might be part of the Brotherhood Without Banners. After that, the sigil of the Night's Watch is black. Yoren raises it up to see whether it's black, to show them that it's black for all of the Lannister men to see. Or black for House Dondarrion, called the man who bore the enemy banner. Arya could see its colors more clearly now in the light of the burning town. A golden lion on red. Lord Barrack's sigil is purple, lightning bolt on a black field. Arya remembers that when she saw Beric Dondarrion the last time, he had rode off for Gregor Clegane, thinking that this was an event that occurred a long, long time ago when she was, quote, Arya of House Stark. No, quote, Arry the orphan boy. And Arry wouldn't know about lords, so she shuts the fuck up. Meanwhile, Yoren waves his banner all around, asking if they're blind. Can't they see that he's not a Dondarrion man? By night, all banners look black. The knight in the spiked helm observed. Open, or we'll know you for outlaws in league with the king's enemies. Yoren demands to see the manager, aka he asks who's in charge of this rabble, and up steps a fat motherfucker with a pig face and a manicore on his shield. And this guy's name, Sir Amory Lorch, who I really, really hate and who really, really sucks. More on him later. He commands Yoren to open the gates in the name of the one true king, Joffrey Baratheon, which false. He says that this all while the town burns around them. So Yoren says, fuck off. Okay, he doesn't say that. I've just been watching a lot of Succession lately. He says they're just recruits for the wall. They're no foes of the Lannisters or Amory Lorch. Yoren says it's probably winking in the direction of Arya Stark, but we can't know for sure because it's dark. Look with your eyes, Arya wanted to shout the men below. Can't they see we're no lords and knights, she whispered. I don't think they care, Arry, Gendry whispered back. So Arya looks into Amory's pig face using the method of, quote, actually looking with her eyes the way Cyril Farrell had taught her, and she knows that Gendry is right. Amory demands that they open the gates if there are no traitors so that they can have a real quick look to make sure that there's no traitors. But Yoren holds fast against Amory. No, you can't come into the holdfast. Fuck off. So be it, Amory says. You defy the king's commands and so proclaim yourselves rebels, black cloaks, or no. Yoren says they've only got young boys in the holdfast, and Amory, who, by the way, is going to die like a fucking coward by a bear at the end of this book, says they're all going to die. The quote-unquote knight raises a fist and his spear comes flying through the air aimed for Yoren. Instead, it hits Wath through Instead, it hits Wath through the throat, and he falls boneless from the wall. Storm the walls and kill them all. Out. Storm the walls and kill them all, Amory Lorch said in a bored voice. More spears come out flying from the band of war criminal traders below, and the sounds of war erupt from outside the walls as Arya yanks Hot Pie to cover. Torches fly next, and Yoren shouts, "Blades!" and for everyone to spread out and defend the wall. In NFL QB style, Yoren goes with a 3-3-5 spread defense, dispatching Koss, Urek, and Lamy up front. Hot Pie says he doesn't know how to fight, and Arya says that it's easy, probably thinking about dropping her little stick with the pointy end line. But then a hand clasps the top of the wall, and she instead remembers fear cuts deeper than swords. When at the top of the helmet reappears, she slashes hard with needle into the hand, and the man falls. Hot Pie yells at Arya that there's someone behind, and she whirls as a pirate cosplayer with the knife in his teeth swings his leg over the wall. She thrusts needle through the middle of his helmet. But more men mount the walls, using the unmortared stones to climb their way up. Yoren tangles up the knight who is carrying the Lannister banner with his own black banner, yet still more climb. And Arya wishes that Joffrey was here so she could put her sword through his face. Super fucking metal, Arya. Love it. 4 Lannister goons try to take an axe to the gate, but Koss dispatches them via arrow one by one. Dabba wrestles the dude off the wall, but then he gets stabbed for his heroism. Lamy smashes mofos with a stone. Another boy named Kyle begs for mercy before a man with a wasp vigil puts a mace through his face, which, fucking war crime. Everything smelled of blood and smoke and iron and piss. But after a time, it seemed like there was only one smell. A skinny dude gets over the wall, and Gendry smashes his sword against the man's helm, taking the helmet with him. Under the helmet, he was an older dude, and this guy looked scared. But even as Arya was feeling sorry for him, she was killing him, shouting, "Winterfell! Winterfell!" while Hot Pie screamed, "Hot Pie! Hot Pie!" beside her as he hacked at the man's scrawny neck. Hot Pie, a war cry to send terror to the hearts of every motherfucking Lannister traitor. But even as we stand in awe of Hot Pie's heroism, Arya sees that the Lannisters are moving into the courtyard below her. She jumps down to fight alongside of Gendry as the death blossoms around her. And then Yoren was there, shaking her, screaming in her face. "Boy," he yelled, the way he always yelled it. "Get out. We've lost. Hurt up all you can, you and him and the others. The boys, you get them out. Now." But wait, how the hell is Arya going to get everyone out? "The trap," he screamed. "Under the barn." Thank goodness for the plot device, George. Love it. Yoren runs off to the fight, and Arya grabs Gendry, and they're heading for the barn. They scoop up Hot Pie and the red shirt Lamy as well, and then they run through the heat, hot as a furnace, into the barn. The air swirls with smoke with a, quote, sheet of fire from ground to roof. In the barn, as the animals they rode in scream, kick, and rear, knowing that the fire is coming for them. But then Arya sees the 3 people in the cart, Jaqen, Rorge, and Biter. "Boy," called Jaqen Hagar. "Sweet boy." The trapdoor was ahead, and the fire was spreading fast. Arya forces the crying girl, Lamy, Hot Pie, and Gendry through the door, and then she asks where the axe was. Gendry says it was where he left it on the chopping block earlier. So Arya runs into the courtyard and continues to witness further Lannister war crimes. She saw Koss throw down his blade to yield, and she saw them kill him where he stood. She finds the axe, though, and she grabs it, but then a mailed fist closes around her arm. She spins and places an axe cut into the man's leg, never knowing what the man even looked like. Going back into that barn was the hardest thing she ever did. Smoke was pouring out of the open door like a writhing black snake, and she could hear the screams of the poor animals inside, donkeys and horses and men. A donkey was on fire when she came through that ring of fire. Arya throws a hand over her nose and mouth as she smells all the burning flesh and hair of the donkey, and it becomes thick in the barn. She hears Biter screaming. She crawls towards that sound. Finally, she gets over the wagon and tosses the axe into the wagon. Rorge catches it as Arya boogies away. She hears the axe crashing against the wood behind her, and then she hears the bottom of the wagon rip loose. Arya dives into the tunnel, dropping 5 feet. She tastes mud and doesn't mind the taste. At least it's cool in here, while above ground, it was death, fire, and blood. A great crash erupts behind her and above her, and Arya kisses mud of the tunnel floor, and then strangely cries. For whom? She could not say. And that is Clash of Kings, Arya 4. Battle chapter, battle chapter, battle chapter. What do you think of this chapter, man?
We had some minor complaints about the slow pace of Arya's first few chapters in The Clash of Kings, which is why we bundled them together into a single episode, but you can't argue with the payoff. Arya 4 is a perfectly executed horror movie of a chapter, ramping up the tension and dread of those earlier chapters before strapping them to dynamite, lighting the fuse, and running like hell. Up to now in A Clash of Kings, George has told us about the war crimes spreading across the Riverlands rather than showing them to us. Now we see the real deal. And it's an unsparing horror show of soldiers slaughtering civilians, including children, without reason nor hesitation. Like all good horror writers, you see George working to cement anger at the world in both his characters and his audience, and that process has only begun for Arya, as we'll see in her chapters to come.
Yeah, the first 3 Arya chapters kind of exist as travelogues, and I defended them in episode 75, as we talked about, about 11 weeks ago. And Arya and her friends are heading north into the mouth of the beast. First-time readers, they don't know that, though, right? I mean, so they'd be forgiven if they came into Arya's 4th chapter and been, Oh, here we go again. Arya's on her way up north, just traveling in a bunch more times. We're going to end this chapter with no action happening. Except that George, to use a very, very overused but appropriate phrase here, he really kind of subverts her expectations. In Arya 4, the chapter opens pretty similar to its forebears. You've got the party continue to move through the countryside. You've got the need to get away from war. You've got the natural obstacles the party has to think their way past. But then there's the decision to head up to the town on the God's Eye, the haunted house feeling of the town. But hey, wait, now that we're back to having a campmeal in the abandoned holdfast, but no one wants to talk. Then Arya has a wolf dream. She's had it before, right? She had it in Arya 2 and Arya 3. But this time she wakes up in a fright. Someone is coming, and then it's war. Red war.
You nailed it. It's that sense of dread that really makes this chapter what it is. The chapter as a whole has this sinking, sickening sensation of a trap slowly closing around Yoren and his pack. And yeah, George throws us for a loop right from the get-go. He begins the chapter with some of his most serene imagery. The river was a blue-green ribbon shining in the morning sun. Reeds grew thick in the shallows along the banks, and Arya saw a water snake skimming across the surface, ripples spreading out behind it as it went. Overhead, a hawk flew in lazy circles. Lazy circles, because no one's in a hurry. Nothing is particularly urgent. This is one of the few times in the series that George really kind of stops and takes this radical ecstasy in the natural world. I think another great example is the time when the beginning of Jaime's first chapter, when he's just out of prison and he's thinking about the sunlight and how he kind of hasn't gotten used to it and feels in love with it again. But then George immediately brutally undercuts this like utopian image. It seemed a peaceful place until Koss spotted the dead man. And that's immediately George showing you the reality beneath this beautiful, bucolic landscape. And then you get Lamy bragging that he could taste the corpses in the water. And that really stood out to me on reread, that he's bragging about this. Like, obviously, it's a sign of corruption and death spreading throughout the land, but it's also a sign of his persistent innocence in face of it, that he can only interpret this as a thing he can win. Like he's a kid on a road trip, like trying to win a game of license plates out the window. Of course, innocence is not the same as likable. And Arya is losing her innocence, hence the emphasis on her seeing the body. George wants to let you know that Arya is taking this all in. It's having an effect on her. And this corpse indicates, of course, that, man has sullied the friendly face of nature. And it's a marker of the war that our heroes cannot escape.
Right. I want to say like this chapter works almost as Tolkien pastiche. We've got travel chapters, which end up being a lot of what's found in Lord of the Rings and in The Hobbit too. I'm reading The Hobbit right now with my youngest daughter, which is a lot of fun. But a lot of it's just them just kind of walking up and down the hills and all the observations they make there. And there's kind of some thematic similarities that we see between Arya's early class chapters and Tolkien's overall work. You've got the similarities in man despoiling nature. But what's interesting is that it isn't technology in A Song of Ice and Fire that's interrupting nature. It's man himself, right? I think that's the thing that we're seeing here is we're seeing that man is killing man. It's both an offense against nature, which is very Tolkien-esque, and it's also an offense against the state of nature, which is the way the natural order is supposed to work things, the way the natural order is supposed to work. It wasn't supposed to happen that you'd have dead men floating down the river, making the water taste bad, poisoning things for years and years to come. This is all completely out of bounds, really, and this makes these chapters very fulfilling to me, but also makes them a little bit sad as well, that we have all this death and destruction that's basically flowing through this huge thing.
That's a great distinction to make, that it's adopting the structure of the Tolkien travelogues, but the tone is a little different. And I think I bet that's a deliberate move on George's part, because if you look at like Bran's chapters in The Storm of Swords, it's the Tolkien structure and the Tolkien tone. Like the first part of the Night of the Laughing Tree chapter, when it's just them moving through mountain valleys and looking down on the hushed world in the fog, it's very Lord of the Rings. So I think that George is trying to, as you said before, kind of stand on Tolkien's shoulders and push these kinds of stories in some different directions. But we then have Yoren laying out in detail how the road is narrowing before them, that it's leaving them no destination but Harrenhal. And the irony being, of course, is that Harrenhal is currently the headquarters for the Reavers who will descend on Arya and company in this chapter. So even if they had escaped Sir Amory's infernal gaze, they would have wound up in Lannister clutches regardless once they got where they were going. There's no mercy to be found. There's no way out of the war. That's the constant drumbeat throughout these early Arya chapters. And this is why it works so well for me that Yoren's killers aren't the Lannister goons he confronted at the inn in an earlier Arya chapter. Because you get this good, perfect mix of agency and happenstance. And I think you need both, which I think is something George does a good job with throughout the series. Like on the one hand, Yoren has backed himself and his charges into this corner, in part because he was trying to avoid said goons catching up to them on the King's Road. And that's how they ended up in this town with no way out and no defense, because he had to get off the King's Road. On the other hand, no one could have predicted that Amory and his wrecking crew would show up just to burn an empty town, because why would you do that? So it's not on Yoren to have seen that coming. And I think at that point, these soldiers are more like emissaries of cruel fate than they are rational political actors. And accordingly, you see signs of doom looming throughout this chapter. You have Hot Pie's invocation of the ghosts of Harrenhal. You have Arya's memory of Old Nan's wonderfully grisly stories about said ghosts. You have empty cottages, and then empty farms, and then the empty villages. It's like Westeros is emptying out from the bottom up, and you're being shown that process. And then, Arya hears spooky ghost sounds in the village. Ooh. But, it's all adding to the tone. It's all adding to the mood. All of which adds up to nails on a chalkboard for Arya. It's telling her that they shouldn't be here and they need to get the fuck out as quickly as possible. And she's got a rational basis for it. When Lami makes fun of her for being scared, she has this great comeback. I'm not, but they were. Mm-hmm. And so we have to take that seriously. And so much of Arya's story is about fear. And yes, fear is indeed the mind killer. But it's also important to be able to tap into it and understand it as Arya does here, to take other people's fear into account when you're making your own decisions.
I agree, and I think like the fear that Arya is experiencing is extremely natural. I mean, there's a lot that's indicating that this place is not the place that they want to be right now. I also think it's interesting in terms of how the show does it, because the show has it that the same Gold Cloaks who had confronted them earlier in season 2, then meet back up with them and then take Sir Amory Lorch with them. And I don't know that that's necessarily the best turn in watching it in retrospect. I feel that this kind of impending sense of doom works better as kind of a not a force of nature, because it isn't a force of nature, but it's just like there's a randomness to it that makes
it's the balance. I think there does have to be a dose of randomness to it. And I get why in TV you're looking for concision and just visual shorthanded recognition. I get why you use the same people, but I like it that it's not, because it gives you the sense of a big picture, that there's no safe haven, there's no rules you can live by. It's not like Yoren and his folks would have been fine if he'd never pissed off the Gold Cloaks. They probably would have run into someone like Amory Lorch anyway. And I think it's important to have that balance. But Yoren's counter-argument to Arya's well-based fears is, of course, the same as it ever was. Thing is, the folks who lived here were at war. Like it or no, we're not. Night's Watch takes no part, so no man's our enemy. As before, George uses Yoren of the Night's Watch as a tragic figure of both righteousness and folly, a good man blind to his bad world. He just asserts this and assumes that even though the people here in this town didn't want to be part of the war, as he admits, he assumes that they can decide to not be a part of the war if they want to. He never considers that his information about Harrenhal might be out of date. Like, the Riverlands are ablaze with war at this point, but he just assumes Lady Went is going to be there with a cheerful smile, welcoming him and his to hearth and harvest. And that is because, it's not because Yoren is not a smart man. It's because to acknowledge that is to admit two terrible truths. One is that the Westeros he believes in, the one embodied by the ideal of the Night's Watch, does not and cannot exist in the middle of total war. Mm-hmm. And the other is that he has led not only himself, but his charges, including children, including one child in particular he feels duty bound to see home, straight into the belly of the beast. It's that same disillusionment that was the central focus of Book 1, but now in the context of the omnipresent violence that exploded at that book's climax. Yoren goes down insisting that he has the authority to make Amory Lorch turn heel and leave those kids alone, because he's the Lorax, goddammit, and he speaks for the realm. And ultimately, he's as much a bygone figure as the Lorax, as those figures in Old Nan's stories, believing that the realm Aegon the Conqueror forged when he burned Harren the Black will protect him. And Arya is learning the grimmer reality. No man's our friend, which is much more important. Neutrality in a civil war makes you more vulnerable, not less. And while Yoren's at fault for blinding himself to that, I think it is ultimately more a critique of the War of Five Kings creating that situation more than it is a critique of him. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that, and I think it finally dawned on me as you were talking about your point about why Harren the Black story is in there, because is in this Arya chapter specifically because it's showing how the rules of warfare changed for Harren the Black, who had built this magnificent fortress that would have stood over all of the Riverlands and likely subdued it for centuries and centuries and centuries. But ain't gonna subdue dragons. Dragons can fly over walls, right? Because I mean, that's that line from Old Nan, right? Because dragons fly. Like, that's how she concludes every story about Harrenhal, which is great. It's showing the changing face of warfare in Aegon the Conqueror's time, but it's also showing us the changing face of warfare in the War of the Five Kings, because that bygone era you were talking about, it's not that long ago. It's like 4 months, 4 months, maybe.
True.
Tops. I mean, granting that the scale of the Lannister war atrocities in the Riverlands is far and above like Westerosi norms of warfare, Yoren's been traveling Westeros his entire life, from Dorne to the Wall, as he says in Arya 2. And in those travels, he's operating with the assumption that his status protects him from the dangers of the road. To kind of reemphasize a point from the last time when we visited with Arya back in episode 75, Yoren's belief that the Night's Watch neutrality, he believes that it safeguards him, works similar to how Catelyn will think that that guest right will protect her and Robb at the twins. That no one in Yoren's life, save for the one boy who attempted to murder him, as Yoren was talking about in Arya 3, has ever attacked, threatened, or denied Yoren the courtesy of safe conduct, is because, it's sourced to Yoren having, an ostensible neutrality. Given that George has decided on the Red Wedding at this juncture of the story as a means of ending Robb Stark's claim and, of course, ending Robb Stark once and for all, I think the upcoming Lannister abandonment of a cultural norm, I think the upcoming, as we're going to talk about here momentarily, the battle portion of it, a Lannister abandonment of the cultural norm is groundwork for the Red Wedding in the next book. But just to kind of also reemphasize something we talked about back in episode 75, the small irony in all of this is that Yoren ain't exactly neutral here. He's sheltering the daughter of Eddard Stark, safeguarding her from the Lannisters. Now, that's in no fucking way means or form to justify what Amory Lorch is about to do here. For lack of a better term, Yoren is a non-combatant in this war, and Amory has no idea that our venerable Night's Watch recruiter is secretly sheltering Arya of House Stark. But the greater question George wants us to ask about the Night's Watch and about its ostensible neutrality is it a value worth upholding when innocents are endangered? Yoren chooses to save Arya at the end of a Game of Thrones, and Jon, in A Dance with Dragons, will choose to save, quote, Arya, rather than give her over to a monster in the form of Ramsay Snow / Bolton. But that's not actually Arya in A Dance with Dragons, and the actual Arya that will return to Jon in The Winds of Winter or Dream of Spring will have been through a lot of life experiences. With one of those experiences that shapes her forming her outlook being this very event from this chapter, the end of this chapter.
You made great points there about connecting the story about Aegon the Conqueror to what's going on here, the changing rules of war, and then connecting that to Jon's struggle and Arya and Dance. That's just great. You can see George working similar ideas into this chapter he's going to come up with later. I love finding that stuff on reread. And yes, even before the battle, we are beginning to see the effects of the long road on Arya. And she's very much in a liminal state in this chapter. She's like on the threshold of the abyss, like glancing in. She's caught between the values represented by her desire for home and the nihilism inculcated by everything she sees along the way. The struggle is reflected, of course, through the prism of her mentors. Yoren believes in the Watch like she believes in Winterfell. But Yoren is not like a spotless, glamorous archetype fresh out of the songs like Syrio, and he dies less spectacularly, although no less heroically. Mm-hmm. And you can still see Arya invoking Syrio in this chapter, and specifically in the name of using his unreal skills to master unforgiving realities. Like you have Kurz catching a fish with his bare hands, and Arya deciding that, yeah, she can do that. Why? Because she caught cats, and fish don't have claws. It's because Syrio taught her to catch cats, and Syrio is this magical, mythical figure in her mind. So that makes anything he did superior to this random guy, even though catching fish is really, really hard, and this dude clearly developed that skill over a long time. Or later on, much more dramatically in the battle, when Yoren and Amory are quote-unquote negotiating. Look with your eyes, Arya wanted to shout at the man below. Can't they see we're no lords or knights? She whispered. I don't think they care, Ari, Gendry whispered back. And she looked at Sir Amory's face, the way Syrio had taught her to look. And she saw that he was right. Again, Syrio is now myth, but Arya is now stuck in the mud with Yoren, because Yoren is the much more like grounded, down-to-earth mentor figure compared to a swashbuckling legend like Syrio Farrell. And you have Arya trying to wash herself of that mud, quite literally when she gets into the God's Eye and starts washing herself, and talks about how the water still feels warm, like summer, that doesn't feel like tears. So you have nature speaking to safety and rebirth and end to all this trauma. And Arya thinks to herself that she wants to swim home. She thinks she can swim home to Winterfell. And of course, geographically, no, you can't do that. And that speaks, of course, to this enduring childishness, this wistful naivete that hasn't quite been beaten out of her yet. And it's not dissimilar to Yoren's own wistful naivete about the realm he wants to believe in.
Right. And again, we're getting a little bit of Tolkien-esque thinking here in terms of like nature washing away kind of the dirty, horrible things that these people have experienced. But I mean, we're also getting this kind of similar to Sansa Stark feeling from A Game of Thrones in Arya's fantasies of going home, swimming home for that matter. We have Sansa begging Joffrey to send her home when she knows that he's not going to send her back. Seeing then when at the top of the Red Keep, over the fields and the forests and the oceans, the mountains atop the castle, yearning for home. This is just to put this out there. This is the preeminent motif of our entire cast of Stark and Snow point of views. Always. always yearning for home, fantasizing implausible scenarios where this will occur. Think Bran thinking that he's going to go see Jon and write out to him in Bran's 4th chapter, and that not at all emotional scene from a Game of Thrones Bran 4. Think of this chapter 2 where Arya thinks that she wants to swim home back to Winterfell. She can't physically do it, but she fantasizes about it. And I think that's a constant returning motif for the start. So they all want to get back to Winterfell. And I think ultimately they all will.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, of course, that Arya and Sansa, who are total opposites, as we all know, both still want to believe in true knights showing up to save the day, almost like they aren't total opposites after all. And it's, again, Arya's in this in-between position where she realizes more than Yoren does that watch neutrality won't protect them from whoever made these villagers run for their lives, but she still clings to her own myths. Hot Pie was being silly. It wouldn't be ghosts at Harrenhal. It would be knights. Arya could reveal herself to Lady Went, and the knights would escort her home and keep her safe. That was what knights did. They kept you safe, especially women. She still thinks that. She still thinks you can just go up to a policeman on the corner and tell them what's wrong and everything is automatically going to be okay. Even though she's starting to see signs that that's not the case, it hasn't really crashed in on her like it will at the end of this chapter. And it's so revealing and sad that she's like, Hot Pie, your myths are just absurd. My myths, however, the mythical fantasy figures I believe in, those are totally legit and part of reality. When in fact, true knights are as rare on the ground as ghosts. And that's something Arya is going to gradually come to understand over the course of her story. And as with Sansa, the lingering belief in songs is always linked to desire for home, as you say. That's what their fantasies are always about. But when Hot Pie tries to bridge the gap by talking to her about her family, Arya feels the need to shut him down because she has to keep her identity a secret. She can only let it out in the context of battle, the context of bloodletting, yelling Winterfell at the top of her tiny lungs. And as Genji will reveal to her later, even that brief expression of identity is enough for Hot Pie to catch on that quote-unquote Ari isn't as quote-unquote he appears. It's like herself is being squeezed out of her, like juice. Just like Yoren's belief in the realm is being squeezed out of him. And just like all these people are being squeezed into this trap, it's this iron crucible that will not let any of them go.
And I think it's interesting, too, that we have both Hot Pie and Arya representing two sides of the same coin. Fantasy elements that are being interpreted by the small folk person in the form of Hot Pie and by the noble class in the form of Arya Stark. This is an interesting distinction between these two. But when pedal comes to metal and you've got noble and small folk alike and you've had war on the horizon, they're all going to get thrown into the meat grinder. And I think that's the thing that kind of unites them terribly, horribly at the same.
No, it's true. You're right. 100% right. And all these chapters, themes, and imagery, everything we're talking about come to a head when the soldiers arrive. Arya is warned of their approach by the howl of a wolf. And the wolf, of course, represents home and family, House Stark, etc., but also the outright predators that she met on the road, the wolves in Arya 3, who really did not seem interested that Arya happened to have a direwolf in her family's banner. They were going to be happy to eat her regardless. And yeah, regardless, like this warning, it doesn't save anyone. So what good is it? What good is it to have this prophetic connection to the wolf howl to let you know danger has come if it's not enough time, not enough with power to save anybody? Again, that liminal state. And the soldiers strike like a force of nature. Arya compares them to lantern bugs and fallen stars. But of course, George includes that little moment where they're setting fire to the trees as well as the houses, just to emphasize, as you said, that they're not part of any natural cycle. That fire consumes and leaves nothing. They're here to salt the ground so nothing grows. Now, Tywin thinks of this purely as a message, as a terror with a purpose to be sent to Robb and his Riverlord allies, with no consideration at all for what happens to the Lamies and Hot Pies of the world. But that's self-sabotage. He's leaving his family with nothing over which to rule. No home for the people to come back to. No peace worth having after the war is done. He'll tell Joffrey that you need to, serve your enemies fire and steel when they defy you, but when they go to their knees, help them back to their feet. What he doesn't seem to understand is that his fire and steel tactics often make it so that his enemies will refuse to go to their knees because they have nothing left to gain back. You see that in the Riverlands. You see that in Dorne. It's one of the big flaws with Tywin Lannister's approach to, everything.
Right. And as we know historically, and people such as Stephen Atwell, but because, of course, we have the Stephen Atwell Tribute podcast, have pointed out, even in the most horrific ways that, Chef O'Shea has been used, it never reached the scale that Tywin Lannister is authorizing his men to utilize. And I mean, consider, too, that this town is a ghost town. It's abandoned. There's no civilians hanging out in the town. No one to, put the fear of Tywin Lannister, I was about to say God, but Tywin Lannister in their hearts.
Same thing.
All the farmers have boogied on out. So Tywin's heartless, cruel, and war crime objective has already been achieved, right? People have all run the fuck away. They're gone. They're gone. There's no one left to kill or to terrorize here. And yet these assholes burn the town anyways. And they're bored by it. Like Amory Lorch being like, yes, kill them all. Just do what you need to.
Yeah, it's not even making him happy.
Right. It's just like, whatever. This is just kind of like, this is a, what day is it? Thursday? Okay. Yeah. We kill all the
It's
civilians
burn
on
the
Thursday.
town day. Exactly.
Right. Right. And this to me is distilled nihilism, providing zero benefit other than just destruction to these bored soldiers and their who gives a shit commander. It reminds me of a scene from the great movie Full Metal Jacket, where Joker is flying into Vietnam aboard the helicopter, and the Dork Hunter is just there, just massacring civilians one by one, not for any strategic or tactical benefit, not because they're enemies or potential enemies, but for the pure nihilism of killing people. And this is what's going on here. They're not interested in spreading Tywin Lannister's message, yeah, the message, if you want to call it that, his fucking war crime. They're interested in just killing and destroying, because that's an end unto itself to these guys, and that is the definition of nihilism in the real world as well as in A Song of Ice and Fire.
I think, the reference to Full Metal Jacket is wholly appropriate because, of course, George is drawing from his understanding of Vietnam and just Vietnam in pop culture when he writes about war in A Song of Ice and Fire. And only Arya Underfoot is providing eyes on this side of the Game of Thrones and A Clash of Kings. As we've said before, all the other POVs are kind of in their rarefied spaces as they negotiate with each other. But here we're down on the ground. We see what the war looks like for most of the people. And Yoren confronts these soldiers, of course, waving his Night's Watch cloak as a banner. And that's just the most Yoren thing ever. That perfectly sums up his character. Like, if war is, in terms of political imagery, a collision of banners, then this is Yoren trying to carve out a neutral protected space in the shadow of his black banner. But as one guy says, all banners look black by night, as in all banners die during the long night. All banners turn black and the war doesn't matter anymore. And Arya very perceptively sees that Lorch's true banner is fire, that he's not open to ideological disputes. He's just here to burn. That's that great ironic moment when Lorch is listing his titles and Joffrey's titles and Tywin's, and he's the true king while the village just burns behind them. Moreover, of course, the Lannister men just leap to the association with Beric Dondarrion, because claiming neutrality gets you lumped in with the guerrillas who are fighting all sides. And indeed, Beric believes in an idea of the realm not dissimilar to Yoren's. He will articulate that when he finally shows up in the flesh in Arya's story. The difference is mindset. Beric has already died once, expecting Lannister thugs to respect the king's banner, and he will not make that particular mistake again. Still, I think Yoren is right to refuse Amory and his thugs' entry. I think Lamy is wrong when he says we should have just yielded, they would have spared us. Because Yoren can tell that Amory is not genuinely giving him a chance to spare himself and his charges. Amory just wants an excuse to attack. He wants a fig leaf. He wants to be able to proclaim them rebels and thus non-persons. That's why he bothers to articulate, you are now rebels. It doesn't matter that you're in the Night's Watch, and now we have the right to kill you. Yoren's way at least gives his charges a chance to defend themselves, rather than just allowing their killers to walk in and butcher them without so much as a fight. Do you think I'm right on that count? Do you think Yoren was in the right to not give in to Amory Lorch here?
100% correct. I think it's easy to kind of like, quarterback the, like, basically what how fucking that phrase up. Yoren, people can go back and be like, oh, Yoren should have done this and that, but there's no, in my mind, there's no way that Amory Lorch isn't trying to kill everyone there. He's just looking for easy entry into the holdfast itself to kill people, so he doesn't have to assault the walls itself, which he ends up doing anyways. I think, when we look at a character like Amory Lorch, we're not looking at a guy who's coming in with, the right principles, the right morality that you want to negotiate with this guy. It's like negotiating with the character with this. Would you negotiate with the person who put a sword through Rhaenys Targaryen, who threw a 3-year-old boy down a well, according to the Rhaen Tarbeck rebellion? This isn't someone who's a neutral arbiter that's going to be like, oh yes, let me consider your points. No, I can see now that you're not actually part of the Brotherhood of Banners. Instead, these guys are all fucking war criminals, and Yoren can spot that, and he is absolutely correct in preventing these war criminals from entering into the holdfast itself.
And again, that's a huge weakness for the Lannister side, not just the obvious immorality of it all, but even from a cold, detached take on their own interests. Like, this makes it impossible for them to make peace. This makes it impossible for anyone to take them seriously as negotiating partners. We see this in A Feast for Crows, when Jaime, who was at that point one of the most well-intentioned and trustworthy people on the Lannister side, shows up at River Run. But why should the Blackfish trust him after the Red Wedding, after everything the Lannisters have done in this war? Why should the Blackfish trust that his word is worth taking seriously? Even if Kingslayer wasn't there to hang around his neck, the Blackfish probably wouldn't be trusting him at that point, and he would have a good reason not to trust him. It's all so short-sighted and turns to ash in Tywin's hands. But this is not a Tywin Lannister POV chapter. This is an Arya Stark POV chapter. And one of the things I like about this battle scene is that Arya's arc keeps thrumming along beneath the surface. She doesn't just drop out. The mention of Beric leads to that brief flashback to her relative halcyon days in the Red Keep before her father's fall. It's just so George can measure the gap, so he can show you, she thought of herself as Arya Stark, now she thinks of herself as Ari. That Sansa had that nice dress and they were fighting at the dinner table and their lives were just so much different. And then you have Arya wondering why the Lannister men can't see that they're not enemies, that they're not an army. And it takes Gendry, who was raised among the peasants, to see the truth. They don't care. That the world you were taught about as a noble child doesn't apply now that you look and sound and smell like a peasant. And so much of A Clash of Kings, from the title on down, is about the kings posturing for each other. But it's so important that the first real combat we see in the book is not between their armies. It is one army turning on the people for the sport of it, using the letter of the king's justice to justify their actions while violating its spirit on every level.
Amen.
And George goes for the gut as Yoren tries this last appeal to the world he believes in. Got me young boys in here. Young boys. Mercy for these kids. You're not going to butcher them, are you? And Amory looks him in the face and nods. Yoren's world comes up empty against the world Amory believes in, the one he and Gregor and Vargo Hoat are making real on Tywin's behalf. Young boys and old men die the same. And this battle, of course, can't hope to match the big ones in terms of logistics or twists and turns. When you compare this to the Blackwater or the escalating conflict at the Wall and a Storm of Swords, of course, this is going to come up short. And George knows that. He's not focusing on that. He's focusing on the intimate details that sear into your memory, the stuff Arya's going to be living with as a result of this battle. And that's especially appropriate, given that this is her first battle. This is a significant ramp up from the violence she witnessed and briefly took part in back in Book 1. So you get these very cinematic shots, like the hand coming over the wall with the detail of the dirt in its nails, or Yoren using his black banner to wrap around and kill the knight who mocked him for it. You get all this great fire imagery. It's glinting off stone and swords and the eye slits of Gendry's helm. It captures the feeling perfectly of the world burning down around you. I like that Jaqen keeps up his role as like the one pop of color in Arya's otherwise deliberately visually drab A Clash of Kings chapter, because he's the one who talks about Red War. Because anytime Jaqen gets a line, he's got to throw a color in there, just because that's his role. And then, of course, Yoren appears to call Arya a boy one last time. Sniff.
Pour one out.
And, I know, and tell her to run. And it's ironic, given that Arya's story in A Clash of Kings feels like trapdoors opening up beneath her. What saves her life and those of her companions here is a literal trapdoor. A trapdoor out of hell, no less. That's what Arya compares it to at the end. And Arya makes it out of this hell with her values intact. She insists on saving as many lives as she can, feeling even for the animals that are dying in the barn. Of course, while saving the little girl is unambiguously heroic, saving Jaqen is more ambiguous, and saving Rorge and Biter will have dreadful consequences down the line. But it's really not fair to hold Arya responsible for that. She is just one red blood cell flying down the artery of this war. And that's what makes the chapter's end so devastating. Arya held her breath and kissed the mud on the floor of the tunnel and cried, for whom she could not say. Is she crying for Yoren? Is she crying for her family? Is she crying for that blonde hank of hair they found in that soldier's purse, that woman who's going to wait for him forever? There's so much to cry for in Westeros at war that she just can't choose.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's amazing. As always, everyone in the chat here on YouTube, if you guys are watching on YouTube, is being like, yeah, this is amazing. Goddamn, Emmett is just tearing shit up. Keith J says that's really awesome. You know, it's funny. Like, I think, at this point in the depth section, I would be talking about the tactics and the battles that people use. I'd be like comparing it to like the Whispering Wood or the Battle of the Green Fork, but this isn't a battle, really. Honestly, if you look at it, what's going on here, this is one person trying to survive a slaughter. There's no, I mean, yes, Yoren tries to spread his guys out along the wall, tries to keep himself from being overwhelmed, but there's no real question what's the ultimate outcome going to be.
Yeah, there's no suspense as to who's winning. That's a good point.
Right, and that's kind of what makes battles interesting, like the Green Fork and the Whispering Wood. And I think at the same time, like, this is not like a battle chapter. I did say it was battle chapter, battle chapter, battle chapter at the beginning of this episode. This is a slaughter chapter, and the slaughter of this chapter results in the death of lots of boys and lots of young men. Yoren, as we'll talk about here momentarily, and that's sad. It's sad that common decency and norms of warfare don't protect these people. We've got numerous people in this chapter attempting to surrender, give up their arms, put their hands up, and yet they're just run through with a sword or a spear, or they're hit with an axe, as we'll talk about momentarily here. This is all calling us not to evaluate this as some sort of, and then Jaime moved his troops here, and then Rob, though, flanked around here.
Yep.
It's saying the boys are dying, and this is what warfare in Westeros has led to: boys dying.
Perfectly said. I think that's a great distinction that George makes elsewhere, like in the battle outside Astapor via Quentin in A Dance with Dragons, when he's part of the Windblown Sellsword Company attacking the quote-unquote new Unsullied, and he realizes as he's fighting them, oh, these are just boys who are dropping their sword and screaming for their mother. This is a slaughter, not a battle. And that's a powerful point that I think George makes all across the series, but especially in this chapter. So I think that about takes us to foreshadowing and groundwork for Clash of Kings Arya 4. We get more setup for my beloved summer home of Harrenhal, both in terms of its sinister reputation and its very specific political meaning for Arya. Hot Pie's eyes got wide. There's ghosts in Harrenhal. Yoren spat. As for your ghosts, he tossed the stick down in the mud. Mount up. Which is a great illustration of the forces of material and supernatural that are always conflicting with Harrenhal. You get the image of ghosts, and then Yoren throwing a stick in the mud, like the most grounded, down-to-earth action imaginable. And then you have Arya telling all the great stories of Harrenhal, and that perfectly captures what this location is about, because this is the big new setting of A Clash of Kings, and George keeps bringing it up over and over in these early chapters before we even get there. And it gets across so well that it stands at the crossroads of so many things, the crossroads of the political history of Westeros, the crossroads of the magical history of Westeros, and the crossroads of Arya's own story. That this is the last place she assumes is going to be safe for her. You know what I mean? Like after Harrenhal, everything starts to seem really suspect, and she's never feels safe behind curtain walls ever again after this.
Right, and I think it's fascinating too when you look at how Harrenhal is built up. We've got it in Catelyn's chapters, we've got it in Tyrion's chapters, we've got it in Arya's chapters. The buildup is setting this place up in sort of the same way in Arya's chapters that Beric Dondarrion, who's not going to appear until A Storm of Swords, is consistently referenced by Amory Lorch in this chapter, by his bannermen here as well. And Thoros Amir is also referenced here. So when these characters actually show up on screen, or Harrenhal as a castle shows up on screen, we are well set up as readers to be like, yeah, we're really excited to get here and see what this place is all about. And that's great. I think I always say this, but it's always great writing on George's part to have the setup then pay off in such a masterful way, because Harrenhal is fucking metal, man. Like that place is metal and terrible and horrifying and just all the wonderful things all in one place.
It is the perfect setting to come to after this chapter, after George blows up Arya's Clash of Kings storyline, the structure we thought it was, in this memorable fashion. Harrenhal is a perfect place to regroup, and we'll talk about a lot of reasons why once we get there later in the book.
Agreed there. So how about that axe that Arya tosses up to you, Rorge, right? I mean, that's could that be important? I wonder, kind of. So this quote comes from Arya's 5th chapter. The next Arya chapter, which will come a few weeks down the road. The axe blow that had killed Yoren had split his skull apart, but the great tangled beard could be no one else's, or the garb, patched, unwashed, and so faded it was more gray than black. Oh shit, man! Did Rorge kill Yoren with the axe that Arya gave him? Question mark. We'll find out together in Clash of Kings Arya 5. But yes, absolutely, Rorge totally fucking killed Yoren at the end of this battle.
We'll talk a bit more about it as we get to Yoren's body in Arya 5, and then again when Rorge pops back up at Harrenhal. But yeah, I really love this theory. It seems to fit so well with a lot of the writing George does, that even though there's this omnipresent threat around Yoren, the one who kills him isn't any of the Lannister men. It's one of the people, one of his charges, the ones he was trying to protect, the one he assumed would never do any harm to him. It fits Rorge because he's just violent in all directions, even to people trying to help him. Like Arya saves his life, but he'll still threaten her later in the Clash of Kings without any hesitation for it. And I like that it's just implied, and maybe that this is how Rorge ended up in the good graces of the Lannister soldiers. When next we see him, he's joined the Lannister ranks. Maybe this is how he got an in with them, was by turning so violently on Yoren. And it fits Arya's story too, this kind of way she's wrapped up in death despite her best intentions, if she is indirectly responsible for the death of her mentor who did so much for her. I do like that. Well, not like that, but you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean, absolutely. So I think that about wraps us up for our foreshadowing groundwork. Again, this chapter is much more action-oriented, so we don't have a lot of setup for things coming down the road, just a few things there. But for our theory and discussion portion of this week's episode, we figured we would kind of walk back and talk about a question that we got from one of our sworn swords, Sir Josh B.
Absolutely. Josh B asks, Amory Lorch question, sneaky combining multiple Arya chapters. We apologize for nothing. I've often been interested how in the fandom, Amory Lorch seems to take a backseat to Gregor Clegane. In A Clash of Kings, I think of Lorch as just as big of a war criminal as Clegane, but he tends to be ignored in most of the commentary I've heard. Have you noticed the same? And why do you think that is? I think as Arya points out, the indistinct appearance of the Tickler adds to his monstrous nature. I would think a similar thing would apply to Lorch. Well, great question, Sir Josh. Thank you very much for it. And I have noticed that Amory Lorch does not come up nearly as much in the discussion as Lord Tywin's other mad dogs, Gregor and also Vargo Hoat. And Amory is a prominent monster in the backstory, not only in murdering Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, but also semi-canonically committing child murder in the Rhaen-Tarbeck conflict. I think that lacks the more kind of mythic echoes of Gregor's backstory, in which he's basically Bluebeard. And George never stops the story dead to focus on Amory. He never stops the story dead to outline the precise precariousness of Amory's situation, as he does with Vargo Hoat, the third head of Lord Tywin's terrible trinity, where when Roose is talking with Jaime in A Storm of Swords, George just stops the story so Roose can explain exactly how Vargo Hoat is screwed, because you can tell he just got really interested into the plotting of it. Vargo also has a more distinct personality than Amory Lorch, and again, his revenge plot with Jaime and Brienne is just feels more kind of emotional and is a link to that character. The main reason Lorch doesn't work the same way as the Tickler is that his worst acts are in the backstory, whereas Gregor and Vargo's men dominate the current day atrocities. Amory Lorch, I think you could even say he's redundant, but he has a couple of plot purposes besides wiping Yoren off the map and thus redirecting Arya's storyline. He provides fodder for a crucial reversal later in the book, wherein she feels like she's gained vengeance for Yoren when Amory loses Harrenhal to Northmen and is fed to a bear. A black bear, of course, like the same color as Yoren's cloak.
Hell yeah.
But it turns out, of course, that those Northmen work for Roose Bolton, and they lured the Bloody Mummers away from Tywin, and they just keep bringing the pain to the small folk all around Arya, just like the Lannisters did. Amory also allows Tywin to attempt to redirect blame for the atrocities against Rhaegar's family away from Gregor, which is, as we'll argue come A Storm of Swords, a very revealing move on Tywin's part, very revealing in terms of his priorities, and he wouldn't be able to even try to do that if Amory Lorch didn't exist, if you know what I mean. And on the whole, I think the reason Sir Amory doesn't get much attention is that he falls between the cracks of a couple different kinds of villains. He's not quite the flamboyant evil of someone like Gregor, but he doesn't really quite have the banality of someone like the Tickler either. He's over the top and not quite enough to stand out. I think he's one of the series' less memorable villains, but not everyone can be interesting in themselves. Sometimes someone just has to serve the plot, and I think that's what Amory Lorch is.
Yeah, I think you brought up a number of excellent points about why Amory Lorch doesn't get the same sort of negative opinion that fans have. And you also brought up Roose Bolton and how he conducts himself with Amory at Harrenhal. Spot on, as always. And that gives me the chance to talk about another character parallel. Steelshanks Walton, who I absolutely love as a super minor character in the story. So sad he wasn't in the Game of Thrones show, but whatever. He's bannerman to Roose Bolton, just a normal soldier guy, right? But he also participated in the Red Wedding. And he helps secure the illegitimate Bolton rule in the north. And as Jaime thinks about him in A Storm of Swords, Jaime 6, Steelshanks Walton commanded Jaime's escort. Blunt, brusque, brutal at heart, a simple soldier. Jaime had served with this sort all his life. Men like Walton would kill at their lord's command, rape when their blood was up after battle, and plunder wherever they could. But once the war was done, they could go back to their homes, trade their spears for hoes, wed their neighbors' daughters, and raise a pack of squalling children. Such men obeyed without question. But the deep, malignant cruelty of the brave companions was not part of their nature. And I just want to go back 1 second. I did say that he was participating in the Red Wedding, and he did not participate in the Red Wedding because he was escorting Jaime back to King's Landing. Sorry about that mistake. But I do agree that with you, Emmett, that George is not going for a banality of evil critique in Amory. That's definitely the Tickler character. But I think he's going for a critique of the guy who even Bronn would look askance at. Remember Tyrion 2 we did with Clegane a few weeks ago? Tyrion was a little drunk and very tired. Tell me, Bronn, if I told you to kill a babe, an infant girl, say, still at her mother's breast, would you do it? Without question? Without question? No. Celsa rubbed thumb and forefinger together. I'd ask how much. So at the very least, and I mean that, at the very, very least, Bronn has a code that might prevent the murder of innocents and of the murder of children. But for Amory, he's willing to throw a 3-year-old boy down a well, stab a 3-year-old girl like Rhaenys Targaryen, and murder members of the Night's Watch. All because, he's got orders from Tywin Lannister, right? I mean, that's all his driving motivation. And I think the critique of characters like Amory Lorch in the series and Steelshanks Walton is the kind of criticism of the unquestioned acquiescence to authority. An authority in the cases of Tywin Lannister and Roose Bolton that is fundamentally evil. Evil, man. I mean, it's evil that the High Lords are able to play their Game of Thrones, but Roose Bolton and Tywin Lannister play the Game of Thrones in a particularly brutal fashion. And they've got unquestioning underlings who are able to carry out unethical, immoral, evil orders on their behalf without question.
Well said, sir. And I agree that's probably what George is going for. The problem is, for me, again, Amory is kind of falling in between because he's not quite Steel Shanks Walton in terms of like the deep malignant cruelty of the brave companions not being in him. No, that deep malignant cruelty of the brave companions very much is in Amory Lorch. As Tywin says, there was no explanation for why he stabbed Princess Rhaenys like 50 times. So, but on the other hand, again, he doesn't have the standout scenes and backstory as Gregor. So he doesn't really, for me, fulfill every archetype perfectly. But he does serve his job very effectively in this chapter. I do hate him and want him to see him die, as you do for what happens to Yoren. But then we get that great reversal of that when the people who kill him turn out to be no better. They turn out to be the kind of the same people in the case of the Brave Companions. And from here on in, our focus is not going to be so much on Amory Lorch. When it comes to the Reavers of the Riverlands, it's going to be much more so on Gregor Clegane and his men and the Brave Companions. And I don't want to say that's more fun, because it's definitely not. But it is, I think, that I think is where George more fully realizes these villainous characters and more kind of concretely expresses what they say about the world around them.
I can agree there, my friend. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. For you guys who are tuning in on YouTube, we will stick around and answer questions. We know that normally we have a kind of midpoint question section. We decided to do all of that at the end, our kind of discussion thing where we can let down our long hair. No, I don't have long hair. And just
one of these days.
Yeah, one of these days. For those of you who are listening, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, Podbean, Spotify, anywhere and everywhere you find your podcasts.
Check out our Patreon if you haven't already at patreon.com/NotAcast ASOIAF. Follow us on Twitter at NotAcast ASOIAF or shoot us an email at NotAcastASOIAF@gmail.com. You can follow me at Port Quentin on Twitter.
And you can follow me at Brendan Beefish on Twitter, Brendan Beefish on Reddit, and my website is warsandpoliticsofIceandfire.wordpress.com.
We want to give a shout out and thank you to our high lords and ladies on Patreon: Lord of the Squishers and Warden of the Deep, Lord Clint Esquire, the Wolf in the West, Sir Sorsadelica, Lady Veneris of the House Colgarian, first of her name, the Overworked, Queen of the Pencils, the Eraser and the First Draft, Queen of Monochrome, Devotee of the Great Game of Thrones, Portraitist of the Realm, Lady Realist of the Seven Kingdoms, Creator of Arts and Maker of Drawings, Lady of 1,000 Words, Septon Eastwood of Introvert Isle, Septon Neribold, the Shoeless Sage, Lady Madeline Rivers, Justiciar of the Trident, Sister Winter, Lady of the Wolfswood, Nessie the Elusive, Warden of the Neck, Defender of the North, and Keeper of Secrets, Sandy the Dragon, Blood of Queen Daenerys and Lady of Jameson, Lady Brit, Bastard Mistress of Harrenhal, Sir Thomas the Raven Knight, Lord of Blackwood, Lord Timothy Yu, Sir Courtenay, what did the five fingers say to the face Penrose, and our newest High Lady, Lady Dillsdale, the Star Spear of Crescent Hill. Thank you so much to our High Lords and Ladies, and welcome to Lady Dillsdale.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for your support, and welcome to Lady Dillsdale. Lady Dillsdale. God damn it. I'm sorry. I apologize. We really appreciate it. Yeah, she just signed up today, so that's really cool. Really appreciate it. So join us next week for Clash of Kings Tyrion 3, in which the Lannisters react to His Grace King Stannis Baratheon's letter declaring them traitors. Fuck yeah, it's righteous. And Tyrion begins work on a project for his metalworking class in high school that probably won't turn out to be important at all.
Already we're getting set up for the Blackwater, folks. You can tell how much George loves his definitive contribution to fantasy battles to date, because he starts seeding in all the little elements he's going to need in place very early on in the book. And one of the big ones is Tyrion's chain, but we'll get to all of that in detail next week for Clash of Kings Tyrion 3.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you to all who are watching. Again, stick around. We will be doing questions and discussion with you guys, laying down our hair, and we will see you guys next week.
All right.
Go ahead and stop the
recording. Well, thank you all guys so much for watching. Make sure you hit that like button if you haven't already. That really helps us out. And that we can start answering some of your inane, pointless questions as per usual.
Oh, wait a minute. That's my line. I'm supposed to be the mean one. You're the nice one.
Yeah, well, you gotta keep them on their toes, Jeff.
Oh man. Every week we stray farther from the light of God and closer to Jeff's Craster's impression again. Well, we haven't done that in a minute. I mean, that's gonna be West Virginia,
Lord.
Right? Yeah.
Tony 3483 asks, the Blackwater episode will be 2 or 3 episodes? Good question. I mean, as we'll get closer, we'll look at those chapters. It makes sense to combine them, but some of them are so dense we might end up splitting them up and doing them individually, to be honest.
Yeah, it's especially like Davos 3 is just a
you got to do that on its own for sure.
Yeah,
all the Davos chapters are so dense, and that's no exception.
And it's our only real naval battle chapter, right? In A Song of Ice and Fire, I'm trying to think. I think that.
Well, there's the Victorian one, although that doesn't last particularly long. In Feast, the Reaver. And that's not exactly naval strategy. It's more just him jumping on a deck and yelling at everyone to come and die. So it's the most, in terms of strategy and most in-depth. Yes, it is that one.
All right. We got a
Broken.
question.
Yes,
Oh,
Broken. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead with Broken King. I'll do
Okay.
this. There you go.
Broken King asks, since Halloween, in your barbarian lands anyway, is approaching, what are your top 3 favorite horror moments in A Song of Ice and Fire? It's a very good question. For me, Damp Hair's Shade of the Evening Dreams and The Forsaken, if I'm allowed to lump them in together, is number 1, just in terms of the sheer shock and awe imagery and what it says about Endgame and how Yoren is kind of creating this nightmare for Damp Hair to go through. Close second would be the White Attack at the Fist of the First Men and Storm of Swords. That is just some of the most peerless horror writing I've seen anywhere in terms of how George strands you in Sam's mind after the battle and gradually reveals all the horrible shit that put him in that position. And then number 3, obvious choice for a reading, got to go with The Red Wedding. Again, in terms of like the build-up and how Catelyn feels everything going wrong before it starts to go wrong, and then it keeps getting worse. I mean, there's a reason we all keep coming back to that stuff.
Yeah, it is really, the horror is very much in George's wheelhouse. If you guys have been following along with us on Patreon and if you guys have been following along with us on Patreon and doing our Fever Dream episodes, you can see that George got his foundation in doing horror as well as sci-fi and fantasy, all in the late 70s, early 80s. So, of course, little plug there. Check us out at patreon.com/NotACastAid. So I have to get those episodes on Fever Dream. Our next one's coming out in early next month. Additionally, I think for me, my top 3 would be Night Fort, Brand the Night Fort. I think, you referenced this in the episode itself, but I think Quentin at the Battle of Astapor is very much horror imagery.
Yeah, leaving off Quentin, I'm sure he would hate to see that on my part, but yeah, that's a good point.
And then I want to say like House of the Undying too, especially with that blue heart that in the middle there and the Undying. Like, yeah, that's very much the horror imagery that George is going for. He does a really good job at doing.
That's a good point. It wasn't House of the Undying always feels to me like more like I think of it as fantasy first and horror second, but that's definitely a good point. The blue heart, or like when she's running down and the candles are going out behind her in the House of the Undying. That's a very good point. That's horror influenced stuff for sure.
Absolutely. Let's see here. Lord Micah, one of our small council patrons, asks, I got a question. I got a what if question. I love those. How would Yoren act around Jon Snow while Jon is Lord Commander?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I mean, there are a lot of Rangers and that Jon really wishes he had with him. So many good, smart people die before Jon ends up Lord Commander. Yoren seems to think quite highly of Jon. I imagine he'd probably be a strong Jon supporter and probably a pretty useful one. I mean, we only see Yoren on the road. We don't know how good he actually is at being at the wall. I imagine it's a while since he's stuck there for a while, but he might be persuaded to do so. And I think he would be a valuable ally for Jon, I would say.
I agree with that. I think that Yoren maybe gets kind of grouped in with kind of the leadership of the Night's Watch, but he's not actually a part of the leadership class of the Night's Watch. He's just a recruiter, which is cool. It's very cool that Yoren has the best recruiter in the entire on all of Westeros. He's traveled up from Winterfell from the Wall to Dorne and for 20 years. But he's not necessarily leadership material, although he would probably not say that he's leadership material. But as we see in this chapter, he very much is leadership material, I want to say. So I think he would support Jon. I think we don't actually get his opinion about things like wildlings and wildling resettlement or anything like that. So I'd be curious.
Sure, that never comes up. Yeah, that's a complete wild card. But I got to imagine he would just hate guys like Janos Slynt and Alistair Thorne. I can't imagine him getting along with them. So I think he would back Jon in the same way that kind of like Cotter Pike backs Jon just because he hates everyone else. I feel like that could probably be Yoren. Maddie Winters, one of our. Sorry, did you got another one you want to go for first?
Oh, I was just going to go with Questing Beasts. Quick one.
Sure.
What will the girls be dressed up for Halloween? They're going to be dressed up as pumpkins this year for Halloween. So they're both going to be pumpkins. We got my wife got all of their costumes already. So they're very excited. They were playing with the plastic of their pumpkin costumes today because it's my day off from work. And I was playing with them. I was being the father figure.
But are you going to go as a giant pumpkin? Are you going to go with David S. Pumpkins from the Saturday Night Live?
No. I'm going to dress up as upper middle class management. I think is what I'm going to go for as Halloween.
A perfect disguise. No one will ever notice you. So I'm going to go for the one from Maddie next, I think.
Yep. Let's do it.
In which book is Arya's POV the best? My unpopular opinion is that I like Arya the best in A Feast for Crows, but that's because I love gratuitous world building. Same here, and I'm more fond of Arya's Braavosi chapters than many are. It's difficult for me to pick a best one because I think they all have their strengths and flaws. Arya's like different POV arcs. Like I made in terms of like sheer amount of great stuff happening in them, I think I'd go with Storm, just because those chapters with Barrack are amazing, and then you get the Red Wedding and all the stuff with Sandor. But the early Arya chapters in Storm were kind of a slog, mostly because she's not really making any critical decisions and her arc isn't really advancing much. Like, you get these little intimate moments in these class chapters where her arc is developing, and that kind of gets put on hold in early Storm. So I'm conflicted. What about you?
I'm going to say the Woods of Winter because we only have the one Arya chapter, and it's very.
Well, aren't you something?
Well, we do. So here's something interesting for you guys. So we know that Mercy was written like right around, like before George split. It's abandoned the 5-year gap, so it's a very very old chapter.
Good point.
It's been pushed from Feast to Dance to now the Winds of Winter. We also know from something that George's cartographer artist who drew the maps for the Lands of Ice and Fire says that there are multiple Arya chapters set in Braavos itself, and that the cartographer, whose name I'm forgetting off the top of my head, has said that he utilized some of these chapters in developing the maps for Braavos itself. So I'm very curious to see what Arya's adventures are going to be like in Braavos. At some point, she has to come back to Westeros, and I think those will probably be the best chapters. But I'm going to go with the Winds of Winter because we just have the Mercy chapter so far. Like you, I think like the early Clash, the early Storm Arya material where she's traveling, it's not my favorite. I think there's certainly value of it, especially here in A Clash of Kings, as my dog kind of growls and rolls around behind me.
He begs to differ. He's much more of a Braavos fan himself. He likes agrees with Maddie.
Yeah, I agreed there. But unfortunately, Arya's Feast chapters are my favorite. I love her 2 dance chapters. I think those are fabulous and fantastic, and I think that'll only continue to get better as we get into the Winds of Winter.
Well, I'll accept this answer, sir. I guess that's okay. What do we got next, sir?
We got a question from Joe Schmo 725. Did Brienne sacrifice to the old gods by burying Nimble Dick in front of the Godswood in A Feast for Crows?
I don't think literally. I don't think we're going to see Nimble Dick's spirit show up in like Bran's chapters in the Winds of Winter, although I would personally love that. But at a level, at a more metaphorical level, yeah, I think that's kind of what's going on in that Brienne chapter, that you've got this castle kind of overgrown by trees in this old world that's just heads whispering of legends and yore. And Brienne is kind of offering Nimble Dick as this sacrifice to that world. And it's very bittersweet. So I think what I'm saying is I think George staged that scene very deliberately to get across like a theme and a tone, like kind of feeling. I don't think it's going to directly tie into the magical side of the plot, though.
I agree, and I think like the thematic side is what George is going for there. I think it's a really evocative scene emotionally.
Mm-hmm. Oh, very much so. I'm sorry, I never trusted you. I don't know how to do that anymore. Oh, right. It's one of the great heartbreaking lines in the series.
Just hit you right there in the chest. You know, I love it. I don't think it was intended as a blood sacrifice to the old gods. I could see why people would think that's the case, but I really hope it's not the case, because I think that blood sacrifice ultimately is bad. Am I speaking like just crazy to talk here? Is sacrificing human beings to the old gods or to R'hllor bad? Maybe. Well,
it's very deliberately a contrast to Stoneheart, who's constantly hanging people off trees and does not feel bad about it at all anymore. So I think that's really what we're being shown to set up for. And also, I think worth keeping in mind that Feast is the most like secularly minded book in the series. It's the one that has the least emphasis on magic. So if you're gonna come at any book with a grain of salt where that stuff is concerned, Feast is probably the one.
Agreed there.
All right, what else? What do we got?
Got one up on the screen right now.
All right. From Frank B. Did the Harrenhal curse get Yoren for his I ain't afraid of no ghosts invocation, or is it only for the owners? There is definitely an irony there in Amory and Yoren dismissing Harrenhal as being a threat when the soldiers do come from Harrenhal to get him. But no, I think the Harrenhal curse is specifically tied to hubris and to people who take hold of it, hoping to climb high. And the Harrenhal curse, whether you think it's real or not, is what gets them. So I would not necessarily put Yoren into that category. I would put Amory Lorch into that category, though.
I would too, and I'm looking forward to Roose Bolton falling into that category in the form of Stannis Baratheon come the
and Littlefinger is going to fall into it, and probably Bonifer Hasty. Although I don't know how he'll die, I'm not particularly looking forward to that. He's kind of an asshole, but I'm not anticipating it the way I am with Roose and Littlefinger.
Agreed there. Just Reds, who is a fantastic artist. If you guys have not checked out his Twitter, he is excellent. Yes. He does a lot of great artwork, and he's also been posting a lot in our Slack, some of his stuff that's coming up. Please, if you guys are interested in joining our Slack as a High Lord Lady or a small council member, consider it, and you get to see some of this excellent artwork that Just Reds is putting up. He asks, Axel Florent equals Axel Rose? Question mark.
Maybe like latter day Axel Rose, like Axel Rose struggling to complete Chinese democracy Axel Rose. Like Axel Rose loses his air halfway to the microphone and can't sing Welcome to the Jungle anymore, Axel Rose. That Axel Rose, not Axel Rose when he was a lean serpentine rock god.
Agreed there. I think maybe like George was inspired by Axel as a name because it means such an interesting name. It's fucking weird. I mean that you would name yourself Axel Rose. I don't think that's actually his God given name, but I think that's the one he assumed when he.
I think God loves giving people names. That's God's whole deal. Is taking car parts and removing letters from them to make them cool, or in Axel Florence's case, adding a letter to car parts to make them cool.
There. All right, so we got a question from Eric R. Elephant in the room. Any thoughts on the recent David Benioff and Dan Weiss thread on Twitter? Whew. Okay, so for you guys who don't know, David Benioff and Dan Weiss appeared at the Austin Film Festival a few days ago, I think over the weekend, and someone had chronicled things that they were allegedly saying. One of the two. It's not entirely clear at some level. I don't want to ascribe a lot of I would like to have a little bit more confirmation before like being like, this is actually what they believe and what they say.
Sure.
They said a lot of interesting things, such as that they really didn't know what they were doing when they went into Game of Thrones, that they were neophytes in this matter, which all of this is true and stuff that, you know, if you've read Kim Renfro's book, you would know by this is an excellent book. Again, read her book.
Yes.
There were some other things too. They allegedly said one of the things they said was that they designed Game of Thrones to break the gap between like people who wouldn't normally read fantasy. They specifically referenced NFL players and mothers as the two categories.
NFL players, you know, that huge market. How many NFL players are there?
You know, probably Frank B could answer that question since he's much more into the football as it goes. But I don't know off the top of my head like exactly what they were going for. I also like, you know, so as you guys might know, for me, like when I do these podcasts, sometimes I'm kind of get a little bit tied and twisted, and like I'm always like kind of like I always feel like when Emmett says something like very amazing and evocative, and I want to respond to it, I'm like, yeah, I love that so much, and I don't want to like say that's the same thing going for D&D, but at the same time I could also be like them like kind of speaking off the cuff being like, yeah, women for NFL players and moms, right?
Right, exactly. And that's I think you have to approach something like this with that grain of salt and like not take every word as though it's inscribed in stone as a perfect description of what happened. But for me, the most disturbing part wasn't any of their overall attitude. It was just like how easy it is for certain people to luck into a TV show with really no experience under their belt. And maybe the fact that, you know, your dad worked at Goldman Sachs has something to do with that. It's and that's not unique to David Benioff and Dan Weiss. That's how the industry works, and that's shitty. And I think people are expressing that shittiness, and I think I understand the catharsis of that. But a lot of it didn't surprise me. A lot of it you can just tell from watching the show over the last few seasons that their interest was moving elsewhere. That they weren't sure how to handle the fantasy elements that come into prominence on Endgame. None of that stuff is surprising. I think the level at which they were flying by the seat of their pants early on and have to learn in the process. That is, I didn't realize the full extent of that. And that does make me angry because when they're talking about, it's like a learning experience. We didn't know how to handle, you know, people who are making the costumes. Like, you know, those are professionals,
right? Whose
days you're kind of ruining by not knowing what you're doing. Mm-hmm. So maybe you should have had some more education on that process, not just learned while you were doing that and thought that was okay. So that does annoy me. And it doesn't change my mind about anything I saw on the show, but it does enhance the opinion that was already there. I'll just put it that way. Yeah, and there was some other things too, like about how because they didn't know what they were doing, a lot of the scenes were kind of shot ad hoc. I think they talked about how the great Lena Headey, Robert Baratheon, whose name Mark Addy scene from season 1 was kind of like written on the spot sort of thing, and people were like, oh well, that's not really showing a lot of like great depth and foresight about what they were actually doing with the craft. But I understand that perspective. Yeah, right. I'll go ahead. But I think, like, you know, it's good that they can adapt things on the spot and on the fly and make some great scenes like that Robert Cersei scene from season 1. There were some other things that were a little more, I want to say, questionable. And one of the things they talked about is that they wanted a live baby to be put on a actual block of ice to film the scene. Yeah, that's the kind of thing makes me think you shouldn't be in charge of projects anymore. Yeah, that's a little beyond like that they wanted to appeal to football players and moms. Yeah, in terms of like questionable things that make me kind of tilt my head. And as the only David Benioff and Dan Weiss defender on the internet, you know, even I could tilt my head at that. Well, as always, when you're talking about D&D, I think there are legit critiques, and then there are critiques that are very personal or just conspiratorial or make it sound like the person has never seen this TV show before. And you want to distance yourself from those as much as you can, but it's hard for me to reach the conclusion at this point that they were the best possible choices to adapt the show. That doesn't mean it's a bad show. That doesn't mean they're bad people. But it's hard for me to read that thread and take away that George and all involved made the best possible decision. I cannot believe that at this point.
I can agree.
For whatever that's worth.
So this will probably be a discussion that'll be ongoing forever and ever because, nothing ever ends, Adrian. Nothing ever ends.
Bringing it full circle, everybody. You knew he would do it.
All right, so we got a question from Ryan Picklesmeyer, who is a cool guy on Twitter that I've been interacting with on Twitter for, I want to say like almost 5 years now. So thanks for tuning into the cast, guys. Really appreciate it. He asked, what do you think would have happened to Rorge, Biter, and Jack and Hagar had they made it to the wall with Yoren?
I think the more question is what would have happened to anyone in their path if they'd made it to the wall with Yoren. Oh, God. Rorge and Biter just obviously end up on the whole, the bad side of the Night's Watch in terms of wanting to keep brutalizing people and keeping the fight going, not out of a specific prejudice for wildlings, but just because they prefer war to peace in terms of what they get out of things. Jockin, that's a complete mystery because we don't know why he was going or if he ever planned to get there. So I really have no response on that one because we don't know what Jockin's politics are like if he even has anything resembling politics. I'm curious if he ended up at the Night Fort, what he'd make of that magic. I'm curious what advice he'd try to give Jon Snow. But yeah, who knows? Right.
I think Rorge and Biter would likely assume similar roles we see among like the Night's Watch mutineers in A Storm of Swords.
Sure.
Like, these are the type of guys that would unquestionably stab Jon Snow in the heart after his Shield Hall speech in A Dance with Dragons. I think that's ultimately what's going to happen with them. Here's another interesting alternate universe type question thing. Would Arya, if let's say everything had gone completely to plan, Yoren has been able to get his boys and himself up to the wall, would Yoren have dropped Arya off in a Winterfell that was occupied by the Ironborn, by Theon? If that had actually gone down, like I don't know about the timeline.
Yeah, I don't know what the timeline when exactly he would show up. Would he show up if like with Sir Roderick's army laying siege to it, or just hear about the Ironborn? Yeah, a lot depends when he gets north of the wall. But if he drops off Arya with any northern loyalist, like, with the Manderleys or someone else on the road, that completely changes the politics in the north once you get past the Red Wedding. Then you have the Stark loyalists with an heir in the hand instead of just on Skagos to rally around. So that would completely change things.
Yeah, I agree. It would have been crazy to imagine that. And hopefully Yoren would have made the right choice in this alternate universe where everything had gone completely well to have not taken Arya directly to and delivered her to Theon Greyjoy, because that would have been real bad.
Yeah, that's an AU I don't even want to contemplate. Any of the Greyjoys, any of the Stark kids getting back to the Iron Islands, like Arya being taken or Bran and Rickon being carried off as hostages, as Asha suggests, all of those are horrifying prospects because that means they're there when Euron shows up.
Yikes.
And Bran, especially Bran being on Pike when Euron shows up, is like the nightmare scenario. All nightmare scenarios. That's the world ends if Euron gets his hands on Bran. It's all over.
Yes, indeed. All right. So Broken King asks, have you read The Wheel of Time? If yes, could you give me your quick opinion? I have not read The Wheel of Time. Have you read it, Emmett?
I have, but it's been years. I remember liking it, but that's about it. I remember feeling like it was like a plateau that George built upon, if that makes sense. It feels like one of the giants on whose shoulders he was standing. And so I may go back and reread it at some point, but I get the feeling I would just find my mind drifting to a swath, but that might be unfair. I could surprise myself.
I agree with that. My only real touchstone in terms of like what I know about The Wheel of Time is that George was absolutely inspired by it, given the fact that he names one of the characters Archmaester Rigney, I think I want to say, who's he is a character or in Wheel of Time or a reference to Wheel of Time. Am I remembering this correctly?
He writes.
Oh no, he says that
time is a wheel.
Yeah.
And then you have in the chapter that Atwell just did an essay on, A Storm of Swords, Tyrion 5, when Oberyn is being introduced, you get the banner of the Jordanes of Tor, which is a golden quill. Yes. So clearly a reference to Robert Jordan with the quill as a writer. So yes, definitely, you talk about the influences of A Song of Ice and Fire, talk about Tolkien and Shakespeare and Tad Williams, and yes, should also definitely add to that list Robert Jordan. But I like Tolkien and Shakespeare and Tad Williams on their own. I have not developed a distinct relationship to the works of Robert Jordan, but I may.
Agreed there. All right, Broken King says Rogue One, the best Star Wars movie. Changed my mind. It's
wrong. It's barely a movie.
Not a movie.
It's a couple of interesting ideas, some hastily reshot scenes, and a big dumb ending. There are parts I like, but it is a boardroom PowerPoint of a movie. It is a movie that exists so the Star Wars universe can be a thing. And cruel words, I know, but this is how I feel about Rogue One.
But you might want to stay tuned for December. Maybe there'll be something Star Wars related come December. I don't know. Maybe on Patreon.
Stay tuned for Kylo Ren's redemption that everyone still pretends is not happening.
God,
I'm sorry. It's the most obviously foreshadowed thing in the history of cinema, but it is.
True that. All right. Broken King, another one. Is Bond for the guy who had a thing for Riella? Yes.
That's an interesting little bit of the backstory. I like that.
That comes out in, is it Embarrassing? Yeah, it's Embarrassing. No, it's in Danny's 7th or 8th chapter. I think 7th chapter in A Dance with Dragons, where Barristan starts talking about the backstory. And he says that there was a knight from the Starland who was in love with Riella. Yeah. And then she was forced to marry Aerys Targaryen at the wishes of Jaehaerys II, which ends up then leading to the downfall and maybe Aerys' madness, according to Barristan, who's a dum-dum. I mean, I love Barristan's character.
No, but true. He's a dum-dum in these regards. But yeah, I like that. It's a nice little humanizing moment for a character, Rayla, who doesn't really get that much attention. And, I like thinking... I like that one of the things George does in the later books is he spends so much time in the earlier books giving us the histories and backstories of the people who fought on Robert's side of Robert's Rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
And then he starts, as the series on, expanding the other side, which we are automatically inclined to think of as the villains, or at least the relative bad guys of Robert's Rebellion. So you get the fleshing out of the Martell backstory, John Connington, and even a little detail like Bonifer Hasty. I like knowing those things.
I like knowing those things too. I think that's a great point you bring up, is that we get Ned's perspective, we get Robert's perspective through Ned's point of view into Game of Thrones. We've got a number of these characters like Stannis and Davos who are all on the Robert's Rebellion side in A Clash of Kings. But then starting in Storm, we get Jaime, who's kind of in that middle area of being on Team Lannister, technically, during Robert's Rebellion, but then of course stabs Aerys Targaryen. Yeah, and then we have, again, in Feast, we've got Doran Martell, who's ostensibly on the pro-Aerys side, ostensibly. And then later we got John Connington and Barristan Selmy, which provide an interesting kind of rounding perspective. And yet, after all that rounding of the storyline and all these different characters, I still feel no sympathy for the Targaryen loyalist side in Robert's Rebellion.
Yeah, I mean, the best motivations you have are people who are fighting for someone they loved or someone in their family. I think I guess the closest I come to sympathy is really the Martells, because Aerys was basically holding Ely as a hostage at that point. So even if they weren't inclined to fight, they pretty much had to. But yeah, no sympathy for any of the Reach Lords who were just doing it as a power grab. And no sympathy for the likes of John Connington, who were really smart enough to know better.
Yes.
And didn't.
They did not. All right. Sir Keith J., our Master Whisperers. I think he's our Master Whisperers on our small council. He asks, considering most of the High Lords at least kowtow to the faith, are you surprised the Riverland small folks don't start shifting a bit to the unfamiliar Red Relu, considering Barracks and Thoros' exploits?
Well, they're starting to. We do see, Gendry. Gendry worships R'hllor now. He didn't do that before. I think this isn't the problem, but Beric and Thoros will defend you even if you don't worship R'hllor.
Yep.
Which is a good thing. But that also means it's going to inherently slow the conversion numbers because, cold-bloodedly, the Septons will tell themselves, well, why bother worshiping Red Relu if Beric and Thoros are still going to try to save our butts? So I think that's part of it. I think it's also just because George doesn't really write religion at the center. We keep coming back to this, but it's true. This is kind of the answer to all these questions because this isn't George's focus. He isn't super interested in it.
He's interested in terms of providing conflict for the characters, but in terms of actually exploring what religion means to these individual characters in the story, yeah, you're absolutely right. He's not necessarily that good at why people would or would not convert to a specific religion based on circumstances at the time. I do think in Jaime's Feast chapters, we do see what was it, Davin Lannister, who starts saying they're lighting night fires in the sky and the hills around the camps of Riverrun, and I'm like, don't know that those are night fires for R'hllor. Those are more likely to be beacon or sigil fires to alert the Brotherhood Without Banners about the comings and goings of Lannister forces and Frey forces in the region around Riverrun itself. Although it could be indicating that maybe, but I don't think so, that the Riverlands are turning towards R'hllor. But I think it's more likely to be alerting the Brotherhood Without Banners when different Lannister forces and armies are coming into Riverrun itself.
True, although they can be both. They can be both a strategic point and a religious expression. But I also think Red R'hllor is unlikely to spread in the Riverlands after Stoneheart is done, because Stoneheart is so obviously less inspirational a figure than Beric. So once the Riverlands gets a good look at her, I think that's going to probably be it for R'hllor's presence in the Riverlands. Not only because she is leading the R'hllorist group in dangerous directions, but because she is herself a R'hllor zombie. So it's not exactly a great advertisement for the Fire God.
Agreed there. All right, we got Brandon Blackfire, who writes, how do you think Jon is going to be brought back in the books?
Same as in the show, but way trippier.
Yes, and we're going to get a number of Jon Snow chapters in the form of ghosts in the Winds of Winter. Maybe I've heard that that's actually going to happen.
Rumor has it.
Rumor has it that there's going to be multiple ghost chapters, multiple, not just one, like two or more chapters of Jon in Ghost. Maybe I've heard that from people. I don't know. I don't hear things though.
But of course, yeah, I think we're going to see it. You're going to see those ghost POVs, Jon working his way back towards his human self, and Melisandre taking part in a great ceremony, probably seeing some visions, and et cetera, et cetera. I think, Brandon Bloodraven might be involved. I think it's going to be overall a Melisandre-driven ceremony, but they might be watching and taking part and showing up in his ghost brain. So I don't think this is like a wild card situation where it's just completely different from the show, but I do think it's going to be a lot more depthful in terms of the imagery and the sensation of something really unreal happening.
Yeah, I could agree there. I think it's trippy, I think is a great word to describe it. Brandon's got a follow-up question, which he asks, will Jon be brought back in Winds or A Dream of Spring? Winds. I'm going to say with Winds.
Winds, even with multiple ghost chapters, there's just too much he needs to do and find out about. And,
right.
He's got to learn about his parentage and get crowned and sleep with Dany. All this stuff we enjoyed seeing so much in the last couple of seasons.
Boat sex, hell yeah. Yes, I agree. I think the ultimate end state of Jon's point of view in the Winds of Winter is going to be his crowning as King of the North.
Yeah,
and
probably.
then we're going to be, after that, the wall's going to come down. Then we're going to be having the Dany Jon stuff that'll be going on, which is going to be so great in the books. Can't wait for it.
Exactly.
Okay, let's see here. Great questions, guys. Really appreciating all the stuff you guys are throwing at us. We are reading all the comments. We are on a 10-second or so ahead of you guys. You guys are listening into us. So yeah, it's all good stuff. Here's a question for you, Emmett. Since Aaron M asks, are you guys as excited as Chloe for his Dark Materials series? Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you recently saw maybe something about his Dark Materials. I got to see a sneak preview. They were doing one, the only one on the East Coast. They were doing one in the library on Philly. So Chloe and I from Girls Gone Canon got to see that episode. It was good. It was not great. There's some worrying signs for me, I feel, in terms of the adaptation of a really distinct world. But overall, I quite liked it. And I've been excited for a long time. Those are some of my favorite books. And I, as everyone else, was disappointed by the movie that came out like 10 years ago. So I'm happy it exists. I am happy for that you're happy. That's how I feel about that, because I don't know I'm going to see his Dark Materials. Maybe I will. I'm right now. I'm working my way through Succession, then of course watching Watchmen as well. And I only have a limited amount of TV time. I only have a little bit of time for those moving pictures. What a hard life you live. It is a very, very hard life, but it's fulfilling because I've got children that dress up like pumpkins for Halloween. Exactly. What more could you want in life? I ask of you. Indeed. All right, what else we got? Frank B says Kylo is going to kill Rey, and Vanessa's anger will split reality into pieces. Vanessa, I'm sorry, it's difficult for me to watch The Last Jedi and not obviously see what's happening with the whole Kylo's sad. They're not even making him up to look evil. They're just having him cry all the time and not kill his mom and feel conflicted. And I understand why you wouldn't want a real life guy like that to join the good guys, but Star Wars is not reality. It's an aspirational fairy tale, and that's so clearly what's happening. But I'll just dance on everyone's graves about this when we get to December. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It'll be fine. I guess I'm going to force myself to see it after my disappointments with The Last Jedi, which I know it's not going to become a Last Jedi question, a Last Jedi podcast. Lest we do that. It's not like there's clearly a dearth of Last Jedi discourse. That's clearly a hole we need to fill. Yes, absolutely. This is what the Nauticast podcast was invented for Last Jedi discourse. Oh, God. So true. Okay, Sir Eric R asks, okay, forget Star Wars. Thank God. Forget fucking Star Wars. Rank the top 3 Alan Moore comics. Well, you are the comic guy more than me, so... Oh, geez. I mean, there's the Man of Tomorrow one, obviously Watchmen. I love the Swamp Thing stuff he's worked on.
because there's just a wide breadth with Alan Moore. I'm not really a fan of V for Vendetta.
What?
I got to admit
What?
that never really clicked for me. So you're shocked and horrified. Why am I wrong?
Well, because it's great. That's why you're wrong.
Okay.
Watchmen 1, V for Vendetta 2, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen 3, I guess is what I would say.
Sure, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I have to reread League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I was really into it when I first discovered it in like high school and college. It's been a long time. I still got them like copies of it dusty somewhere in my apartment. I keep seeing memes using those characters pop up and it makes me go, oh yeah, I should read those again. And then I forget.
That's the thing. Yeah, I mean,
it's like my entire life.
It's decent. I think Alan Moore is a great writer. Would I want to meet Alan Moore in person and have a conversation with him? Probably not, because there'd probably be illegal drugs, which are wrong and immoral involved, and I would never.
Yes, of course. Always. Oh, someone brought up Killing Joke, and I'm not a fan of Killing Joke either. I get why it's a big
interesting.
I get why it's a big influential deal, but it's one of those things I think like we've moved on from this in terms of how it frames Barbara Gordon. So I think it's of its time, and Alan Moore himself has said that he would not write that story again the same way.
Agreed there. All right, Lord Micah, Word of the West, on our small council, asks, talk Arya's supporting cast, pros and cons, or is it closer to being as good as John's or as meh as Danny's?
That's a good question. I think it's closer to the John side. I think Arya has a lot of great supporting characters. Sirio, Yoren. I think Jaqen works very well as kind of murder genie character in Harrenhal. The best, I think, is the Brotherhood, especially Beric and Thoros. They're really sorrowful characters and are worthy of carrying a story in their own right. Once you get to Braavos, her characters, I think, kind of naturally get melted down, her supporting cast, which makes sense given the environment of the House of Black and White. But yeah, that no one stands the kindly man. That's no one's favorite Song of Ice and Fire character. The best thing you can say about him is he's creepy. I picture him being played by like Kyle MacLachlan in the new Twin Peaks, like his evil doppelganger self in that show, just like this dead-eyed, completely just creepy human. But overall, yeah, I'd say Arya has one of the better supporting casts of the major POVs. What do you think?
I agree. I think we've got Yoren, who's great. We've got Cyril Farrell, who's also great. We've got Gendry, who I think is really, really good.
Sure.
We've got the kindly man who exists. I mean, we've got all sorts of interesting characters that are involved in Arya's storyline. I will be curious to see, because I think that we both are of the opinion that Arya will be taken home likely by, oh man, I just blanked out on his name. What's Stannis' knight? Justin Massey.
Justin Massey. I think that's got to be involved. When you see the Theon Wins chapter where he's being sent to Braavos and he's taking in tow Jane Poole, who's pretending to be Arya Stark, and Stannis orders Justin Massey to leave Jane with Jon at Castle Black, but Jon's dead for the moment. So I think Justin might end up taking Jane to Braavos. They might have some interaction with Arya. That seems like too perfect a setup to not happen. You know what I mean?
I agree. So one of the things that's interesting about Justin Massey is that he has this recurring theme in Asha's storyline in A Dance with Dragons, where he's constantly trying to get her betrothed to himself so that he can acquire lands, titles, and so on and so forth.
Sure.
Because he has lost his own lands down in the Crownlands itself, because Massey's Hook is currently occupied with the Lannisters and Tyrells. So what's going to happen? Is he going to try and like proposition himself to fake Arya, and then what happens when he meets up with real Arya in Braavos?
Imagine his face. That would be great if he realized he was trying to get with the girl who had no power. But yeah, that seems Justin Massey is a perfect kind of cynical character to work with in those environments. And yeah, I'll be interested to see how Arya plays off of him and Jane Poole if that happens.
Agreed there. All right, we got Joe Schmo 725. Any fantasy good reads you can recommend or military reads? I'm a United States Army Reserve second lieutenant. Just ran my first range. It went well, but I could use some advice. After you, I'm not as much of the fantasy guy.
Oh, sure. I was thinking you could do the military ones, but yeah, the fantasy was his Dark Materials, which we were just talking about, is great. If you're looking for a more kind of like, if you're looking to get away from medieval fantasy and get into more kind of like Renaissance themed stuff, the Lies of La Clamora is really fun. So I would check. Or if you're looking for something kind of more fussier and old fashioned, there's the Prydain Chronicles that I really like a lot. That's where like the horrible Disney movie Black Cauldron was adapted from those books, and they're very old fashioned but really good. And I think when the fourth one, Terran Wanderer, is a real favorite of mine and feels very much like a precursor to A Song of Ice and Fire in terms of focusing on a lot of what the war is doing to the small folk. Feels very A Feast for Crozy. So I recommend all those. Lloyd Alexander, that's who wrote Prydain Chronicles. I forgot the author's name.
That's a good list. I think it's a good place to start. I'm not much of a fantasy reader, as you guys might know. I'm one of those. I'm an NFL dad and a mom, according to D&D. So
Of course.
of course. So Game of Thrones was really my gateway drug, as well as the Lord of the Rings movie series from the early 2000s.
But of course.
It's a fantasy series as well. Military reads. I mean, I always recommend stuff like Generation Kill, which was adapted as an HBO miniseries about the initial invasion of Iraq with the first Marine Recon Battalion. That's an excellent one. And of course, as you are a second lieutenant in the United States Army Reserve, I do also recommend 3-25-18, which is the infantry battle and tactics manual that you want to get yourself very familiarized with that manual right there. That was my guiding star and guiding light. Also, I've got when I was in Afghanistan, I got issued out the first 90 days, which is a sort of like short manual, which is all about like people talking about their experiences in the first few days in a deployment, which is very helpful for me as well. And Joe, I mean, I don't know if that's your actual name or not, but I guess thank you for your service. Appreciate it. It's a pleasure talking with someone on the online who's also has a military background as well. So it's a lot of fun.
Damn straight. KW Dent is recommending the Black Company series, which I've not read, but I've heard great things about. Guilty Undertaker recommends American Gods, which is obviously great by Neil Gaiman. Bernie recommends Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Ted Williams, a huge influence on The Song of Ice and Fire, which is, those books are really, really good if you haven't read them. Bernie also recommends Wheel of Time and Dune, which, Dune is, obviously in the holy... the crown jewels of the genre, along with Lord of the Rings and The Song of Ice and Fire. So if you haven't read Dune, you should be reading Dune.
I've read first couple chapters of Dune, but I mean, is that enough, you think? Or do I have to read the whole thing?
I think you probably should. I have faith that the movie will be good just from the people making it. So maybe do it before then.
I guess I'll have to do that as well. Gosh, I mean, I did reread Watchmen before the HBO series came out. Before we actually.
So that's you're at least semi-literate. At least when there are pictures involved and people are punching each other. That's good to know. It's good to know.
Absolutely. Okay, another one for Broken King. I just want to say thank you for answering all my questions. You're welcome. And thank you for suggesting Waltz with Bashir. Such an amazing and stunning movie. I was in shock by the end. And yeah. I mean, that's like before we came onto air, we were just kind of joking back and forth, as we do. We're joshing back and forth as bros do about like what we would do like a year down the road. We completely run out of A Song of Ice and Fire Patreon material to cover. We're like, we'll just do a 3-part Waltz with Bashir analysis we have in 2020 when the Wins winner is always coming next week, always the week after that. We'll do Waltz with Bashir 3 parts. But yes, that is an excellent movie. If you guys have never seen it, do highly recommend it. The art in the movie is incredible. The story itself is very, very moving. It deals with the 1982 invasion of Lebanon by the state of Israel, and it chronicles the story of one guy interacting with a couple of different characters in there. So the artwork is fantastic. The story is really, really good, and the music is done incredibly, incredibly, incredibly well. I'm blanking on the name.
It's Max. I think. Let me look up the name real quick. But Waltz with Bashir, one of my favorite animated movies, one of my favorite war movies, one of my favorite scores, one of my favorite movies, period. And it's so Max Richter is the dude's name.
Yes,
I've heard of him
Max
before.
Richter.
It's also just a very succinct and short movie. I think it's like hour 15 minutes long, if that, because it knows what it's about, and it's a core documentary, but done on this animated style that makes it such a ravishing aesthetic experience. So if you've never seen, I remember watching that movie in DC. I was interning at the end of 2008, start of 2009. And saw that movie in theaters, and it was quite the experience. So we recommend it.
Absolutely, great movie. Seriously recommended. Seriously recommended from both of us. All right, Tony 3483. He's in the middle of a conversation with a couple people here from 15 minutes ago, but we figured I would just bring this point up here because I think it's an interesting one that we could talk about. In which he says it's interesting how George R. R. Martin kind of mirrors the erasure of women from medieval history while still hinting that they played a much larger role in reality to the relation to the men around them. Okay, so this is interesting. I think you brought this up before in the past that basically between a Game of Thrones, A Clash of Kings, and A Storm of Swords, George finally got down to actually reading some history about some of these female characters in history itself.
Right.
It's very clear when you get to the Tyrells in A Storm of Swords that George has a firmer grasp of what women in a medievalish setting would do and the types of roles that they would occupy. But at the same time, some of these early books are a little bit harder to read and a little bit less realistic in terms of George's depiction of women in a medieval culture, because they mostly, not all of them, but a lot of them end up being shrieking violets, which was not the case historically for these medieval women.
Yeah, I get what Tony's saying there. I think it's definitely something George is deliberately doing sometimes, but sometimes he's just repeating the erasure. A lot of the time, he's just doing the same thing again.
Yes.
And I think it's in part because that's the kind of story he's drawing from, and in part because he's not interested in some of these particular characters. But yeah, I think and some of it's just he just didn't do the research, and I'm glad he eventually did.
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad that George got the actual research in to actually make a better, more fulfilling story for the going forward after From a Storm of Swords onwards. All right, a little bit off topic here, but great question. Charles E.A. asks, do you think Barristan's statement about killing Robert if he had seen Robert smile at the bodies of Rhaegar's children is a foreshadowing to his eventual confrontation with the Shave Pate?
Ooh.
Excellent catch. Love it. Love it.
That's a great one. I can imagine that completely because that's set up so strongly in Dance with Dragons that the Shave Pate is urging Dany to kill her child hostages, her cupbearers that she's taken from all the noble families in response to the killings on the street, and Dany always refuses. Shave Pate urges the exact same tactic once Dany takes off from Daznak's pit and Barristan takes over as the head of Team Dany. So that's very clear setup that once Barristan is outside the city fighting the battle, the Shave Pate is going to go ahead and kill those kids. Probably kill his Darzo Lorak too while he's at it. And I could definitely see that line coming back in where Barristan tries to go for the Shave Pate's throat. Whether Barristan survives and lives on to fight another day at the side of young Griff is, of course, a discussion we've had multiple times. But I think that might be a deliberate setup. Yeah, that's a good catch, Charles.
It's an excellent catch. Yes, because I think the great thing about Barristan's storyline in A Dance with Dragons is how much Barristan is interpreting what's happening in Meereen through his own specific history of Robert's Rebellion, of serving as a part of Aerys' Kingsguard, when it's not exactly the same. In fact, it's not really much the same at all. We don't have a Mad King figure here. But Barristan has to interpret these things through his Westerosi perspective because that makes him both an idiot and kind of an interesting character at the same time. Yes. But I do think this is an excellent catch on Charles's part that does foreshadow what's going to happen between Barristan and Shave Pate come the Winds of Winter, hopefully at some point next week down the road soon.
Can't even bring himself to say it, folks. All right, let's see. Are people talking about who will like stand in for Davos in terms of Jon's resurrection? Like who's the person who gets things going with the body? And it's an interesting question because unlike the show, in the books, Jon is killed in public, in front of everyone. Not like in the middle of the night, we lured him away to a dark corner, someone finds his body the next day. No, it's in front of everyone.
Right.
So I assume there's going to be a massive, fight. What I've always imagined is like Melisandre sets off some of her special little fireworks, and that's how she gets Jon's body away. That's kind of what I picture going down. But in terms of who helps her, a couple people have suggested like Val seems a likely candidate to like be assist and be around for the Jon Snow resurrection.
I agree with that. I think that Val is going to, because Val has returned to Castle Black by the start of, or rather by the end of A Dance with Dragons. So she's there. We've also got the Queen's Men. Maybe they'll take part in as well since they're ostensibly neutral-ish. I mean,
sure. I mean, we'll see how they react to the news of Stannis being dead.
Right. That's bad news for them because they're all basically dead men at that point. So what are they doing at that point? Hard to say. But there's another character, Tormund Giantsbane, who also is featured in season 6 of the show as being the one people that protects Jon, or actually barges in and protects him from the Night's Watch Mutant Eaters' body. I think that Tormund will likely play a similar role come the Winds of Winter, as well as the band of wildlings that conveniently arrived south of the Wall just before Jon was stabbed. So
yes,
good job on the timing on that one, Jon.
Well done, everybody. Well timed.
Just Rez asked, will Rickon remember Jon? Question
mark. Oh God, I hadn't considered that. I mean, there's the theory that Jon will be so messed up when he gets back he won't realize that Jane isn't Arya, which is a particularly devastating one. But yeah, I mean, Rickon, if they even interact, which it's possible that they won't, I could see that being a devastating thing where they both change so much that they don't really recognize each other anymore. I'm sure there's going to be that kind of bittersweet note for the Stark reunions, and Rickon would be a good vessel for that because he was so young.
Yeah, I mean, Rickon, I don't think he's returning to the narrative. I mean, I think he's going to return in maybe a Davos chapter, singular. But again,
dog story, folks. He's not likely to play a big role.
I'm trying to like dance around this because I know that Chloe is working on an essay about what's potentially
Chloe has the best possible theory when it comes to Rickon and Skagos and Davos and that whole storyline, which we will not spoil the details of. But
we will never spoil
exactly.
But after that one time, yeah.
Exactly. I do not think Rickon is going to play a major role in the lives and stories of any other Stark character. Let's just say that.
Agreed there. Susan Rain asks, out of all the POVs, who is the best / worst supporting cast? Question mark.
Of the main ones, I'd say Jon has the best and Dany has the weakest. I mean, Davos, like, do you count Stannis as a supporting character in Davos's POV? If
Or-
so, then maybe Davos wins automatically, though.
Right. Davos is interesting. Gosh, is he the supporting character in Stannis' story, or is
That's
Stannis
the
the supporting
thing.
character in his story?
It's all that you turned around. And Davos has a lot of great characters in his story, like Alistair Florent, who's just wonderfully horrible. Edric Storm, the Manderleys, obviously, when you get to dance, are great. But among the big dogs, I would say Jon gets point of place because, as we've said before, George just keeps inventing great characters for Jon Snow to bounce off of. Dany, the main one is Jorah, who I really don't like as a character, as I've said many times, and no one else in Dany's camp really gets much depth beyond Jorah.
Right. And I want to say that Hisdar's Oloric greater than sign Jorah Mormont, because Hisdar is a much more interesting character than Jorah, who sucks, who is awful.
Hisdar is an interesting character once you see him as a patsy for the much smarter and more competent Green Grace.
Yes.
Then that's for me what really snaps Hisdar into place. Is when, oh, he's not actually running this. He's a front. The Green Grace is the interesting one. The Green Grace and the Shave Pate are the interesting ones in the Myronese arc, and they're just puppeting everyone else.
What I think is going to be interesting, I think that Dany's cast of characters is going to grow more interesting come the Winds of Winter, because we've got
100% agreed.
Hisdar, who will probably not be part of her supporting cast, he'll be fucking dead. We've got Skahaz, maybe, unless he's fucking dead because Barristan runs him through with the sword. But we've also got Tyrion. We've got Victarion, maybe Victarion can survive like
a second,
1 second. But there's also like characters like Benero, Makoro. These
Tattered
different priests, Tattered Prince. We've got Illyrio probably popping back up in Danny's storyline.
Sure. Widow of the Waterfront.
Yep.
Marwyn the Mage, my favorite. Hopefully, Danny's got a shit ton of advisors coming her way and wins, and wrestling them all, I'm sure, is part of what's taken George so long. But I think it's a good point that Dany has the potential to have a much more interesting supporting cast in Wins, as all the characters who are searching for her finally get there or don't.
Agreed there. I am curious though. So we have talked about how Dany has the worst supporting cast of characters. Would you say, in the same vein as Davos, is Davos a supporting character of Stannis, or is Stannis a supporting character for Davos? Is Quentyn Martell the supporting character for Dany, or is Dany the supporting character for Quentyn?
Quentin's the supporting character in all of our hearts, really. I mean, the thing, Dany does not show up in a Quentyn POV chapter. When Quentyn and Dany interact, it is entirely in Dany's POV, which I think is a very deliberate decision on George's part. So no, I wouldn't even call Dany part of Quentin's story really at all. She's more just like an object that he's pursuing, and the supporting characters are Drink, Arch, and the Tattered Prince.
Yes, agreed there. All right, we got a question from KW Dent. He asks, where would Arya's point of view fall on each of your respective lists when ranking point of view characters in totality?
So what do you think about that, Jeff? Like, among the major ones, where's Arya?
Probably in the middle, I want to say. I mean,
like, better than more so than Jon or Dany in terms of overall, or not, less so?
Less than Jon and Dany.
Less than Tyrion?
Less than Tyrion.
But probably more than Sansa. And probably more than Bran too, I'm guessing.
I don't like. Here's the interesting thing about this podcast, right? I mean, like when we first started this out, I was like, oh god, we're gonna do all these Bran chapters, and I'm gonna be bored out of my fucking gourd.
Sure, of course.
And yet, when we're getting to these Bran chapters, I'm like, yeah, like give me more Bran, like all the time. Like,
all right, maybe they're better on reread.
Maybe they are better on reread. I mean, I think like, you know, this episode we just did for Arya was, I think it's probably going to come out to around an hour, which is a little bit shorter than a lot of our episodes, which is not to make a objective statement about the value of Arya's chapters at all. It's just much more action oriented and not as much to analyze besides like, oh, this person killed him, this person killed that person. And Yoren is, you know, a very tragic figure who thought that neutrality would shield him, which it did not.
And now he's dead. Exactly.
And now he's dead. Sad, killed by Rorge.
I think that as a character, I love Arya as much as the rest of the main cast. I don't think she's necessarily as well written in terms of the structure of her story, because there are moments in which I think she has too few chapters, and then moments in which I think she has too many. And I don't think George ever finds the balance, which I think he does for the other major POVs.
I think I agree there. I think, like I said, like Arya's dance chapters are really strong. I want to say, I think
the prose is great. Like
the
imagery and just like the senses that Arya is experiencing. That's some of George's best, just descriptive writing for sure.
Agreed there. All right, let's see here. Take a few more questions, and then we
absolutely
let you guys bounce over to the History of Westeros live stream, which is starting up in about an hour from now.
Yes,
so
indeed.
make sure you guys check that out.
Okay, we're doing that.
Guilty Undertaker says that David Lynch Dune is a guilty pleasure. I've never seen it. Have you seen it?
Yeah, I put myself through it. I've seen everything David Lynch ever put his hands on that I can track down, and that's probably the least in his oeuvre. It is a guilty pleasure is right. It's a mess, but there are things that are really cornily enjoyable about it, and wacky visuals of the type that Lynch does well. But yeah, it's mostly there to just come up with memes and silly moments and to watch when you're drunk. And I have high hopes that the new Dune will be an actual movie. One can hope.
I hope so too. I think Denis Villeneuve, as they say it up in Quebec.
Denis Villeneuve, oui, monsieur.
Oui, oui. I'm excited for it. I think I really like all of the movies that he's done so far. The ones that I've seen, they've all been really amazing. So I think
he's one of the best filmmakers going. I think I've seen every movie every feature he's made, and they're all great. The Arrival, not The Arrival. Yes. That's a terrible movie from the 90s. Arrival, with Amy Adams was amazing. Enemy was a really weird, abstract one. And of course, Blade Runner 2049, which I know was divisive, but I really loved. I actually preferred it to the original, which might be a heretical statement. But yeah, Villeneuve, he's a master. So I have high hopes for Dune.
I agree. Blade Runner 2049 is better than Blade Runner, the original.
I'm sorry that the original didn't have a story, but it's nice that the new one does.
Right.
I approve.
All right, let's see here. Sorry, again,
no, of course. Let's take a look. I'm trying to find anything. Oh, people bringing up Satin as someone else who could help out, like Melisandre and the Joe. I'm sure he'll be around for that. People also bring up Dolorous Ed, but I'm pretty sure isn't he in another castle now?
He's sent to Grey with
right? Iron Ed, not Iron Ed, Iron Emmett. That's me. Yeah, they're hanging out with aren't they with the spirit, like the wildling women who have a castle to themselves? Isn't that where they are?
Yeah, they all went off with. I want to say it's Greyguard. Maybe is the castle.
Right,
maybe one of those castles is along the wall that they're.
So he'll presumably come back. I guarantee Dolorous Ed is like the last Lord Commander who is like there when the wall comes down, as in the show. That strikes me as very realistic to that character in the books. Doesn't he say like, we'll defend the wall to the last man? Probably me.
Probably me.
So that felt like, yep, Dolorous Ed is going to be in charge. Of course, he's the one in charge when the wall comes down, and probably he's going to blame himself sarcastically.
Agreed there. Frank B asks, bored? So thoughts on Knights of the Old Republic?
Oh,
I love. Have you played the games?
I have, but it's been a long time since you would have more insightful things to say.
Okay, so I think this very early in our episodes for the Not a Cast podcast, we got some question asking about what our first fandoms were, and you said Star Trek, which was great, and I said mine was Knights of the Republic, which
I forgot that,
which was a lot of fun. I think I love this series. I think that I tend to rank the second Knights of the Republic a little bit higher than the first, but the first is still a masterpiece. Like it's almost like the same way we talk about the Song of Ice and Fire books of the Song of Ice and Fire. Yes, we rank A Dance with Dragons higher than the Storm of Swords, but that's not to say Storm is not a masterpiece. It absolutely is.
Mm-hmm.
I find the character of the Exile to be extremely fascinating as a character. I love Kreia as a character as well, that kind of acts against what the Exile is doing and is never satisfied with every choice you make in the game itself. I love a lot of BioWare and Obsidian's work in the Star Wars universe. I did play the Old Republic for a while, the massively multiplayer online game, but then I got married and got a real life and I stopped. So
yeah, that's what happens to the MMOs, folks. Once you develop a life, that just becomes freaking impossible. I remember that with WoW and Final Fantasy 11. Once I started like interacting with human beings, I was like, nope, can't do this.
Nope, can't spend I can't come home after work and spend 5 hours building a fucking lightsaber. I've got to actually interact with my wife and children. I can't do those things anymore, right?
Exactly. Can't be a Jedi today, folks. Got to have a family. Broken King has another question. Favorite classic Russian novel? Ooh,
Crime and Punishment.
Say again.
Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky.
Oh yeah, I mean that was going to be that was going to be my number two. My mom is very upset with me for preferring Nabokov to Dostoevsky because she has the exact opposite approach. But I really love Nabokov's mastery of language and just his prose, and I really like Ada or Ardor, which is one of his more underrated ones. It doesn't get as much attention as Lolita or even like Pale Fire. But I really just the fantasy way it's written and the way it's got like footnotes commenting on other footnotes and like the author just muttering asides to the reader and just this overwhelming ecstatic prose, I think has allowed Nabokov's books to age well, even as the actual content matter hasn't necessarily done so. But Crime and Punishment is of course a freaking masterpiece. So there's no no criticism to be made there.
No, I can't say I'm like huge into like Russian novels. I mean, I'm not into any books really because I can't read. But I mean, I think Crime and Punishment is excellent. I think it talks about a lot of themes that are even present in Song of Ice and Fire, which is really, really cool.
Sure. That's one of the classic books about a person and a power and what the difference is. So can't go wrong there.
Joe Schmo, Second Lieutenant Joe Schmo 725 asks, "Did you ever play any of the Telltale Game of Thrones games, and what did you think of the plot?"
I did not. I think Chloe did. I know people who did.
I'm in the same boat. I have not played them. It's one of those things where I was like, when I was unmarried, I was like, oh yeah, maybe I'll check them out, right? And then I never did, and then I got married, and I don't play games.
All these stories seem to end the same
right?
way.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think they're from what I understand, that the first couple games were really good, but then like the following episodes towards the end were not necessarily as good. But I can't really speak to that necessarily. Yeah. All right, here's an easy one for you. What class did you play Emmett in World of Warcraft?
Oh, I mean, I tended to play as a warlock, which will probably surprise nobody. But I would play. I played as a druid sometimes too. I tried my hand at a couple different things. Frank B asks favorite video game of all time. In terms of like hours I put in, just like granular attention to a game, it's Final Fantasy Tactics. I think that game is pretty much perfect in terms of combat and the system, and just like making the grinding play of it enjoyable. In terms of like more artistic experiences, I mean, something like Shadow of the Colossus or Breath of the Wild, where you get that kind of sense of the natural world and the limits to your character, but also the realm you can explore. Those are great as like aesthetic experiences. But in terms of like, if I was to abandon my life and devote hundreds of hours to a video game again, it would be Final Fantasy Tactics.
So when I was in middle school and into high school, I played a lot of Civilization 2 and Age of Empires 2.
Sure.
Which are great games. I used to try to develop scenarios. I think I did one year as Civilization 2. I built a scenario where it was like this the outbreak of the Cold War became a hot war in like 1985 or something like that.
Right.
So I was able to like develop like the East Coast and all the cities there, and then the Soviets, goddamn commies, nuked every single time I played, because they would have submarines right off of the coast of the East Coast, and they would just nuke us all, and that was bad. As an adult, I want to say the Mass Effect series was the one that I probably played the most. I think I've played through those games 2 or 3 times. I think that Mass Effect 2 is the objectively best game of the series. But I do feel like that Mass Effect 3 is good, even though the people hated on the ending. I mean, it was kind of a forebearer to a lot of the resentment that fan communities have towards the creators, and that like backlash that they had towards it.
That's a good point. I had never thought of that connection before, but I'm not part of like the Mass Effect community, but I was aware of the backlash, as everyone was. And that's a good point. Are there any? I don't play Sims. Do people play Sims? Chloe does Sims, and I watch over her shoulder, and it seems interesting. It's gotten like the Sims I have in my head is like, you can pick a tornado now. Like I got like Sims 2000 in my head, and it's gotten so intricate in terms of like the emotions you can have your characters express and the wild scenarios that go down. And there's like ghosts and weird government plots, and so that's been something I've enjoyed witnessing. Although I'll probably never take part myself.
Well, I mean, I played The Sims a little bit back, when I was in college. But the one I actually played the most was SimCity, like the original, like SimCity 2000.
Yep.
Where I would just like build stuff for a long time, and I'd be like, okay, this is bored. Time to like turn on all the disasters, put them on.
Right, that's the sim I have in my brain, and now it's like this whole, it's like Second Life now. It's just wild how intricate it's gotten. So I'm always impressed by that. Video games for me, it's like with sports, where I used to be really into it, and now I'm not at all. So I don't know what's happening, but I still know all the lingo. I can still carry on the conversation about a video game as we're playing it. But like this is coming out. I'm like, I've never heard of any of those things.
Right. I always feel that way too. And maybe it's the fact that you're 30 years old now.
Maybe what I'm really describing is aging, Jeff. I'm not describing anything particular to my life. I'm just describing the process of slowly dying.
Yeah. Well.
So anyway,
yeah.
Should we take 2 more questions?
Yeah. Let's
wrap this sucker up.
We'll wrap it up, and then you guys, if you guys are still in your wakeful mood, you can head over to the History Westeros.
Precisely. Anyone got anything else for us? Any deep, dark secrets you want to unearth? Now is the time.
God. Wrong. No, don't open that up. God.
Oh, Lord. Or maybe we've said everything. Maybe we've explained ourselves perfectly.
No, that's perfect. That's awesome.
Samir says, "Do you feel like the heckling has been less focused without the girls going canyon?" A fair point.
Yes.
We are incomplete without our sister podcast, as always. Oh, Nolan Patching asks, "What are your top 3 scores from the show?" Ooh, that's obviously an embarrassment of riches. I mean, Warrior Light. You know, you kind of got to go with that, just because how perfectly it's associated with Stannis. I really like the Night King theme from the one night, though. I thought that was beautiful. It's like the best part of the episode is that score. And then I'm just giving all the obvious answers. You got, the Light of the Seven is just such a beautiful piece of music. But what am I forgetting?
The King's Arrival from season 1.
Oh, sure. Right, good point. Classic.
Again, as from a very early episode, one of the things I talked about was how they really should not have had Stannis entering into the Battle of the Wall with the really bad guy music that is associated with Stannis in the show, the Warrior of Light's theme track. Mm-hmm. Instead, they should have had transition to the King's Arrival, because now Stannis is showing himself to be a king.
Right.
Because he's,
I can imagine a big, heavier, like almost more metal version of the King's Arrival.
Right.
Or the Warrior Light segging into that would have been perfect. That's very true.
I mean, I like the Stark theme is really good. It's originally Goodbye My Brother, I think, from the season 1 soundtrack, which then gets progressively becomes just the Stark theme after a while.
The evolution of the score is something that's really beautiful about Game of Thrones. Hey, parts are brought back and woven into other ones, and I really do love that.
Yeah, and that's a cool thing about music, is that Ramin Djawadi does fantastic stuff. And he also, in the season 8 soundtrack, and I think we've talked about this in the Slack itself, we talked about how in season 8, when Ramin Djawadi is doing it, he had previously done Westworld, because he's also the composer there, and he starts bringing a lot of those same musical motifs from Westworld into doing Game of Thrones, which where the Night King theme comes from, which is really, really cool. I want to say it's very much inspired by some of the stuff that Ramin does in Westworld. And then I would say finally for me, I'm going to go with another season 1, which I'm gonna fuck up right now, but it's the Dany theme. Love in the Eyes from season 1, which then of course becomes Dany's kind of theme throughout. Again, of course, it evolves organically through Ramin Djawadi's usage of music going forward. It's a great theme. It's really kick ass. Like if you want to like work out and run to it, like that's the theme to go for, where it's just like the drums are like pounding and stuff like that, and you have kind of those Eastern influences going forward. So yeah, I love it.
Agreed. Okay, well, I think looks like we pretty much run the gamut of questions, folks. Thank you so much for hanging out with us after. I always love this part of the live stream.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to do that. I hope you guys have enjoyed it too, from judging from the comments. It seems that you guys have. So thank you so much for joining in with us this evening, this Monday evening. We really appreciate all your guys' eyes. We appreciate all your guys' ears. We recently passed 800,000 total listens on the Not a Cast podcast. So that's all due to you guys listening in, and your friends and family that are also apparently listening in too, and me, who listens 700,000 times to these episodes.
Damn straight. Thank you, folks, so much. Hit that like button on your way out if you haven't already. That does help us out. And subscribe to us here on the YouTube if you haven't already. And we will be back here next month to just keep these live streams going.
Yeah, it'll be so much fun. So thanks so much for listening, watching, doing whatever you're doing right now. We will see you guys. Well, you'll be hearing from us next week, and we will see you guys next month. Nailed it.
Perfect.